Okay, so did you have a quick cuppa, Sharon?
Yes.
I just managed to get up to make a cup of coffee, to grab a small block of cheese, which I was starting to nibble on. And then my better half said, I hope you're eating something healthy. I held it up and I said, can't you see the apple in my hand? And she wasn't wearing her glasses, so all she saw was a similar type color. And she said, good, I'm glad it's healthy. And we finished and walked away.
Whatever kind of cheese do you eat?
It was, there's a company called Sheridan's Cheesemongers here in Dublin, and they do the most amazing cheeses. And for my birthday recently, I was given a gift of a monthly subscription to different cheeses. So each month I have a little small box of cheese comes in with the 4 or 5 different samplers, and it comes with a description of each one and the background and some information on the dairy that they're made, and the history of the cheese itself and how it's meant to taste, and it's even got a wine guide that goes along with it. So it's it's pretty
sounds awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, it's fantastic. So I was quite spoiled with that one, I think. So one of the things that is kind of really coming to the fore, there's kind of 2 things recently as we progress through this millennium, is we're seeing so much more data coming out. And in addition to, of course, when you have data coming out, you see the AI being done on that data, and then you see all of the legal stuff that has to go around that. And you're doing something, or you've done something there that you're going to share with us, very interesting, around contract creation. And I think this is actual, like, real live kind of legal contracts. Is that what it is?
Yeah, so I'm going to walk you through the solution, but it's not necessarily about the contract itself, but it's about using the automation to allow teams to administer those contracts, because a lot of organizations have a lot of these kinds of documents coming to and fro. And it's important to understand the life cycle of those documents and how, as a team, even in Microsoft Teams, which is where we've put the solution, we can put some easy technology together to help the management of that. So I'm literally going to walk you through step by step how to put this system in place.
Awesome. I know I did a solution for a client about 1.5 years ago where we were trying to do such a thing and routing documents through emails and Slack and all sorts of stuff. And it was an unmitigated headache to try and get the thing done. So I'm very interested to see how we can use this to take some of the pain away. So take it away.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about contract creation with Power Apps AI Builder. So presentation, good. So I'm Sharon Sumner, that's very big on my screen, and I run the Cambridge Power Platform User Group. I'm also recently a Microsoft MVP, so yes, still going on about it. Very pleased to be an MVP. I'm a massive evangelist of the Power Platform and anything Office 365, and I come from a place of SharePoint, so I've been in data and SharePoint from the very beginning, and now being able to leverage that and put some tools in place that end users can create themselves is a fantastic place for this whole development cycle to be. So very excited about where we're at the moment. And yes, I do always say yes to a coffee, even a virtual one in current times. So the whole premise of what we are doing currently in the situation that we're in is creating communities. So communities are themselves the groups of people that get stuff done. So it's these like-minded or similar outcome-focused people. Now that naturally fits itself into a department or a function within a commercial enterprise, which is where I'm going to take you today. So what those communities do is they work as a team, and their goal is to get the thing done faster than they could have done in any other way. So we're going to look at getting the right information to that team in the right order using the single pane of glass that is Microsoft Teams with these technologies behind them. The idea being, though, as always, as I think is the Azure motto, is to make the technology hidden. Absolutely not visible to the end user, so there is no confusion, no complication, and no technology that is going to confuse end users. So it's making the solution palatable. So the contract management community came to me with a request. And what they said is, can we have a system that does these two fundamental things? Actually breaks down to three. So what they need is to quickly generate documents, but they need to do it from some core data. So you've seen these documents. We're talking about contracts, we're talking about NDAs, where you need to fill in the gaps with the relevant company information that you're contracting with. And so part one of the solution is to create those documents. And then the second part of that is to then convert documents that come in into a list of data with renewal and monitor and manage that renewal process. So a lot of contracts are annual, and you don't want somebody to have a full-time job literally administering all of those documents. So we need some automation. So let's look at the document lifecycle that we're particularly talking about in this instance. So the first thing you do with a contract is you create it, and this is really phase one. So first of all, we have a standard contract and we have some specific details that we want to merge into the two, and that really forms the document that you then send out to get agreed. Now, anybody that has ever raised one of these documents will know that it does not survive first contact. So the document itself will iterate, which is why we create it as a Word document at that point, so that dates can change, names can change, scope, pricing, anything along those lines can iterate as it gets passed backwards and forwards to make that document become something agreeable and okay by both parties. When that happens, we get to the complete phase, and the customer will sign whatever the final version ended up being with data that potentially isn't the same as we entered into the first list to create the document. At that point, we then need to monitor from that data that came in the renewal process, who's involved, how frequent it needs to be, who needs to be contacted to get that whole process started again. So then that breaks down into needing 3 steps, and this is how we looked at completing those 3 steps. So step 1 is to create the contract. So using SharePoint, surfaced via Teams, and then Power Automate under the hood to fill in the blanks of that template document. Then we need, because it's going to take on its own life cycle, then we need something to be able to read that information back in without us having to retype it back in or to have to amend the original data list. So then we're looking at something to convert that final PDF that we've probably got that's been scanned in into some data to be able to track expiry. And then finally, we need to monitor that expiry and notify the relevant people when something needs renewing. So contract automation part 1 is one of the pre-recorded videos that I've already done, and that's already up on the Global Azure Virtual site. This is the link to the channel, and we also have a link there directly to my previous video, and I'll make these slides available afterwards. This is also embedded if you just wanted to hit play from there, which I won't do. So that really ticks number 1 of the 3. And so it's these other 2 that we're going to look at today. Before we do that, let's just outline the challenge a bit more. So for this particular part, we're looking at the signed document. So basically a PDF has come in and we need to extract the contract data from it and then process that list. So extract the contract data is our primary goal. So typical uses, again, so this could be used in any context. So any NDAs, in my business, we use it for statements of work, NDAs, master services agreements, those kinds of things. But you could just as easily use it for anything that needs those predetermined fields filled in or then extracted out. So anything that is or can be summarized to be data that needs extracting in the same format to a list can use this technology. So we're going to use Power Apps with the AI Builder module. Now this is a premium service. Don't ask me about licensing. Not even going to go there. And so we're looking at the PDF reader version of the AI Builder. So this is a pre-canned, already packaged version of Azure Cognitive Services leveraged within the Power Platform environment itself, already pre-built for you. And I'll show you just how easy it is for you to make a Power App using the AI Builder. And we're going to do that live today. So we're deploying via SharePoint as our data source and Teams as our front end to, again, remove the complication for the end user. So just really quickly, let's just quickly cover off, in case you don't know, what a Power App is. So Power Apps are the InfoPath replacement. So where we used to have SharePoint form customizations using InfoPath to do fancy stuff with the data under the hood, if this then that kind of decision making, now we have Power Apps to do that for us, and they extend much further than that. They've become a business process automation tool to be able to take data or to use data to help you fill in. They get wider and wider in that you can have Power BI coming into a Power App, or the other way around, Power Apps built into Power BI. They are definitely a mobile app development tool, because out of the box, natively, all Power Apps that we're talking about today will be available on a mobile device. Again, no code, low code. The very essence of this presentation is to show you how you can go away and do this on your own. And again, I'm going to show you a relatively vanilla implementation of this so that you can put your own slant on it as to how it applies to your organization. Everybody is a snowflake, and everybody needs it implemented slightly differently. So also Power Apps are part of this master trio. So we've already used Power Automate, or previously Flow, to show you how to build the document in the first place. Power Apps and then Power BI are the power couple that also come with Power Automate to make that Power Platform trio. It is exceptionally easy to get started with, as I'll show you today, but it's also a really powerful tool if you're a pro developer as well. So please don't feel put off if you're a pro developer thinking, oh, this is the noddy version of something else we've got in Azure. And yes, you can go and achieve similar things with cognitive services and putting things in .NET and MVC and Xamarin. But what this does is it also allows pro developers to have some fun too. One of my developers, as we'll be putting out in the community in the next month or so, has developed a complete clarity version of Pac-Man within a Power App, completely playable, leaderboard, the lot. So pro developers, given the motivation, there's plenty in there for you too. So really, we've got two types of Power Apps. And again, I'm just covering this from a 101 basis in case you haven't had any exposure before. So Canvas apps, which is what we're going to play with today, and the model-driven apps. So model-driven apps are largely putting a process on top of Dynamics 365 services. And so this one doesn't really apply to what we're doing. Whereas the Canvas app, called such because it starts from a blank canvas, is more flexible, and because we're only looking at SharePoint as a data source rather than a more complex database, where you would want to carry some completely complex and transactional data. So we're just using a very simple data source to store that data, and we're doing very simple transactions on it. So Canvas apps is a better fit for us in this scenario. And then how are those Power Apps consumed by users? Well, again, we've got the standard on your mobile or in your browser, but what we want to cover is making it available within a team. And there's really nothing complex about this. Once your Power App exists, we can very quickly, and again, I'll show you today, pull that into a team environment. And it means that it is here and it is relevant for the team that need to use it. So let's just give you a quick summary of what we covered in the first video. So I'm just going to play this short video, and what I've done is I've done short videos without sound that I'll talk over, just so that I don't have any problems with my demos. I've seen a few of those today, so it's probably a good call. So what you can see here, if I just play the video, what you can see here is I've already got a team set up, and I've got two components at the top here: contract details and completed contracts. So with the system that we already put in the short video, which again you can follow along to, we can now add a new item to the contract details, which is the part that's going to fill in a document, and it will go and create that document for us. Now, under the hood, we've got a Power Automate, or a flow that lives in Power Automate. I'm still not quite sure how we're supposed to talk about that. Where we can process whether this is a simple document type or a statement of work document type. So we fill in an entry on contract details. For example, we've got new contract here for Sharon's new company, and over in completed contracts, we would then have a flow in the background that would have gone down a condition statement to bring us to creating the correct type of file with the correct input. This is just me checking the flow, and a point to note here is that it takes 60 seconds for a flow to run, and when you're creating a document like we've done on this one, it's then probably going to take a further 60 seconds for that to complete execution. Okay, because it is in the steps. I'm not going to expand all of those, but in the steps it does show that we are creating the document from the template, and then we are saving that into the correct location with all of the correct data. So there's a little bit of prep to be done on the document types that you use, and there is a little bit of conditional statement needed in here for working out which template it goes and picks up. So if we shoot back to the team, we'll be able to see on a refresh that that document has now appeared. And if we go into the contract details, we can see that that list created this document. And then going into the document itself, you can see that it pre-populated some of the data from that list. So you can see my name is in there, and there are a couple of other details that we could search for. So that's largely what we covered in the first part of this season. And then we need to move on to the second part, which is bringing together the Power Apps side of things. So let's run through creating this. So as you can see, we already have the team, and it's the same team as before with the completed contracts and the contract details lists. So now what we need to do is create the Power App that is going to now read in a document once it comes back from that process. So we're going to go into Power Apps, and we're going to create a AI Builder is already here for us. We're going to create a model in our AI Builder. Again, you can see that I'm using a trial license here, so you can have a play for 30 days without any problems. And we're going to use the form processing rather than these others. These others, again, are pre-built, ready for you to use, like the business card reader. There's lots of demos of these online. We're going to pick the form processing one. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a model and then train our model to understand how to interpret the documents that we're going to give it. Now, again, it's not as simple as passing any kind of a document. There is a format to use for documents that you want to be able to extract data from. And largely for the technical community, we're talking about like a JSON pair, so a tag and a value. For everybody else, you can see what I've done here is created a summary sheet to go on the top of every document. And this is what we filled in with the document populator that we did in section 1. And that summary sheet has got all of the fields in the correct format. So we have a field heading and we have a field value. So as long as we have the ability, what this will do while it's analyzing is it will show us the fields that it can make sense of. So I'm doing this live. I'm not speeding this up at all for you because I think it's important that you see how quickly this gets processed. Usually just when I give up is when it actually finishes processing. So what it's doing, I've given it 6 documents. They're all the same type, and it's now analysed those documents and said, what fields would we like to use?
I get you to just pause there for 1 second? I think we might have an audio problem. Hello, Sharon. Okay. I'm not sure if anybody can hear me, but I think Sharon is trying. Nope, we're back again. We have that noise is back. It's like someone drilling outside.
Okay.
That's it. Perfect.
Okay. Sorry, I think my headset died. I have been wearing it all day.
No bother. Okay, I'll hang up and let you go back to it.
Well, thank you. Okay, does anybody know where I got to before that happened?
Maybe jump back about 2 slides.
2 slides, thank you. Oh, I might fill the time slot now. Did we see this one?
What was the one before that?
The last one that I saw here that it was sound on it when it started going for me was when you were uploading the 4 documents and it was showing the scanning.
Okay, that's on the next one, I think. Okay, let's. Sorry, my mouse has disappeared. Oops. Okay, let's play this one. Okay, so what I was saying was that we already have a team established and we already have these 2 lists where we are creating those initial contracts. So what we need to do is then create the Power App that's going to now scan the documents once they've come back from signing. Apologies if I'm repeating myself. So the first thing we need to do is to build the model in the AI Builder. So what we'll do is we'll jump to the AI Builder and build. This isn't a free service, so you do need to either buy a subscription or you can play with a 30-day free trial. So we're going to use form processing rather than the others, which is one of our cognitive services wrappers that's already been done for you by Microsoft. So once we start the form processing, we now need to give the model a name, and then we need to give it some documents to build the model around. So what it's going to do is it's going to look at the content and try and work out what's consistent in each of these documents to make it able to predict what content it is you want to extract. So I happen to have a few documents here for it to play with. And as you can see probably from those documents, they're all in exactly the same format. So what the predictor needs is it needs a tag and a value. So it's looking for that in each of these documents. So a standard contract where you've just got a company ID somewhere else in the document is not going to be analysed in this way. So to get around that, you can see that what I've created is a summary sheet that goes on the front of every document. And what that summary sheet will do is that will be analysed and that will contain the data. So it's important to keep that up to date with whatever it is that you put underneath that got signed. So this is real time analysing those documents, and what it's doing is looking at every single one of them and finding those commonalities. So it will then take us to this process where we pick the fields that we need, and you can see it's already guessed where those fields are because it's in the correct format. Now I personally had a learning curve putting lots of documents through here to try and work out what would make it pick the fields, and it is that it has a tag and it has a value. So I'm going to pick all fields, and as you can see, I could change the name of the field if I wanted to. I don't believe I saved that, so I didn't hit the tick anyway. So we now have 9 fields selected, and we're going to publish the model. So publishing the model just means that we first have to train it. So what that does is it goes away and looks at those documents and how it might interpret them, given the fields that it needs to look at. So it's gathering data, which it did very quickly. And then we go through the publishing steps. So you cannot use a model until it's been published. So if you want to take a model out of service, you can unpublish it. But that obviously is going to impact any apps that have been built on top of that model. So once that model has been completed with the publishing process, we can then create a Power App from it. And what Microsoft will do is they will start up Power Apps for you when you click Use Model, Create an App. and they will put that model directly in there for you. Now, that's not a massive improvement on going to Power Apps and calling the model in, but I definitely know that I'm using the one that I just published because it's got it in hand. And this process takes a couple of minutes, so we'll just jump to the next one and show you where that is once it's finished. So once it's finished, we get this lovely block that we can resize. It doesn't really matter what you do with that block other than being able to click on it, because it doesn't give you an actual preview of the document. So if we just point to a document that we know is in the same format and analyze it, the system in the background is grabbing the data that it can see from those fields in that document. So what I always find with these Power Apps is that it is better, or a best practice, to analyze a document when you first come in, because it initializes all the variables of the data within it. So what you can see here is that I'm putting a text input box in, and I'll explain why text input later. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the information from the model. So the model is called Form Processor 1, and I can address that by dotting and finding the form content, and from the fields I can then see the fields that I want to bring out. So we can have a look at all of the things that we identified in the model for it to pick out. So 2 would be company name, contact would be the contact. So if we pull out contact, we can see that from the data that we analysed a second ago, it's now got Bob Smith. If we were to analyse a different document, we would get different data. So this is what's currently in memory. So I can now just copy and paste these fields and slightly amend them so that we're getting different values out. And while I'm doing that, I'll tell you why the field. So rather than bringing this out as a label or just a value, what I thought was maybe it might have a hard time interpreting somebody's name, or somebody might have misspelt it on the document, and you may want to make a last minute change. So that's why to put a text field on here, so that the end user gets the ability to make a change before they hit the submit button. So what we're doing now is we're picking a different document to show you that dynamically and live, that data becomes the data from the document that we analysed. It tells us at the top what the document name was, but now we've got that information coming through. And obviously when you build your beautiful apps, you will build, you'll put titles in and you'll make this a much nicer experience. But again, I'm just showing you in a vanilla way how to bring these details out. So the next thing to do is put a Save Details button on there. And now we want to save those details down to SharePoint in a SharePoint list. And that's going to require us to patch some data. So again, if I was doing this for real for a customer, I would have done it the other way around. I'd have done it in tablet mode. But when we hit the button, Microsoft picked to put this in the default mobile phone mode, because in Teams within that window, it's going to look a bit funky. So please ignore those choices. We're just doing that for speed. So, oops, excuse me. Let me just move on to the next one. So the next thing is to create the SharePoint list. For those of you who use SharePoint every day, like me, you'll know this bit off by heart, but let's just show everybody for complete continuity. So if we go to the team and click the Open in SharePoint button and go to the top of the team, we then get the option to add a new list from the context menu. So we're going to have a new list called Contract Signed, okay? And this is to bring in the data from signed contracts. So again, we're going to add some fields to this SharePoint list to populate with the data that we're going to pick up out of the document. We'll just stick with simple text fields for the moment, because having to patch anything other than a text field requires you to, possibly look up what the format is, because we don't do it every day. So back to Power Apps, we now need to tell it that that list exists. So we didn't close the app, we didn't save the app, so it doesn't have any context, but what we can do is simply add a data source and go and point to that new list that we've created in SharePoint. So if we pick a connector of SharePoint, and then we look for the SharePoint list. Now, it comes up in a list at the bottom, and we can just click the list that we just created, and we now have a connection directly to that list. Should we make any changes to that list while we're developing the app, we can right click on this in your app, contract signed, and we can refresh that or remove it if we don't want that data source anymore. So we now have that data source available to us to be able to write that data into. So let's move on to, I'm sure we can do that. Let's move on to how we patch that data into SharePoint. So on the Save Details button, we simply use a patch statement. I say simply, it takes a while for you to learn what this is, but once you've learned what this is, or once you've got a video on hand from one of the experts, Shane Young, for example, you'll soon get the hang of this, or you can just Google it every time and just find out the format. It's not hard. It literally is this one statement. So what we've said is patch into the SharePoint list where there are defaults, set the defaults. And in that list, we are then going to patch this data. So this data is in a JSON pair format. It is really important to put this .text on the end, or whatever that .value is. And if it's a Boolean or a date, there is some funky referencing that you need to do for that data type. So we're sticking to text in this example. Again, I'll help anybody expand this should they want to. And I think I've got a blog post which it takes this a little bit further and shows you dates and values. So within here, we are just going to take these 3 fields that we filled in, and we're saying the title, which is from the SharePoint list. So title in the SharePoint list is going to be set to company, which is this field down here. You can see them all getting coloured. So it's this green field here, and the text value that we currently have in that box. So that patch statement, really easy. And now we have a Save Details button that's got the patch behind it. If we go and look at the preview and we hit the Save Details button, in fact, let's analyze a different document just to show that we're getting the different document details through. And of course, the trick within Power Apps is once we hit the Save button, if it slightly grays out for a second, then we know it's done the job. I'm going to change this one just to prove that the changed value comes through rather than the one from the model itself. So it's gone pale grey, so we kind of know that that saved the data for us. If we nip back to SharePoint, even though we're only in demo mode, that's actively saving the data to SharePoint. And we can see in our SharePoint list, we now have the details of that document. So that document came in, we scanned it, we then pointed the Power App at the scanned document, and we now have the details back in a SharePoint list. So this is the very basis of what it is that we are creating. Oops. So then how do we integrate that back to Teams and make that available for the teams to use? So once we've done this process, we can then just add the Power App into the team itself. So at the top here, we can see we have the various tabs. So if we just search for Power Apps, and obviously there's a caveat here that you do need to publish the Power App and you do need to make it available to the users that are within that particular team. So I made mine have a green star so that I'd be able to see it quickly, and I called it Import Contracts. So here is the app, and this is live in the Microsoft Teams experience. We can also then bring in the SharePoint document library that we are sharing that data, that we are saving the data to. So sorry, it's a SharePoint list. So we want the contract signed SharePoint list, so that now we have the complete picture at the top here where we can import a contract. So we point the analyzer at a brand new contract. It fairly quickly finds the data. We can then change the data if we want to change the data, or we can just hit Save Details. And then easily and quickly, we can just pop to signed, and we can see that information already in our list. Now, ideally, you would have this navigate to a second screen that confirms that things have happened. And again, I'm here to show you the relatively basic side of doing this. So we're just going to analyze another one. We're going to change the data slightly. Let's have Claire Collier Jr. And save that detail. So from an end user point of view, from just sitting within Teams, there's no knowledge of the technology that's going on in the background. They scan the document in, and here it appears in the list. So it keeps things really simple, but we want a little bit more from that solution. If you remember, we had a 3-point list. So we've created the Power App to convert the final signed contract into the list data for the expiry tracking, but we haven't actually done any expiry tracking. So what we're going to need is we're going to need to bring out some dates, and we're going to need to put some notifications on back to the Teams environment, single pane of glass, where we want everybody to live, to tell them that there's something that needs doing. So let's crack on and do that. So as you can see, I've added in an expiry date into the SharePoint list. So I've just done that ahead of time so that we're not here all day just watching me add SharePoint values. So I'm now jumping to Power Automate to create a recurrence. Now, what we're going to do with this, because of the type of contract, so we're dealing with NDAs and they expire annually. So what we're looking at here is doing a recurrence of every month. Could you please go and run this flow and check if any items in that list are due to expire this month? So the way we do that is we just point to the list that has the data in it, so our signed contracts data. And from that list, we are then going to apply to each of the results. So we're going to scoot through every item in that list and using a condition. So that condition is going to say if the expiry is going to expire in the next 30 days. So the way we do that is that we use the expiry value, which it's important that you pick the correct field here rather than expiry. Oh no, it is just expiry on this one, apologies. And what we're going to do is put in a little expression. So we're going to say, is it less than or equal to? And then we're going to put in an expression that looks at adding days to today. So add days is a simple function that says from when and how much are you adding. So we're going to put in UTC now as today. And then we are going to add 30 days. So we're going to say, we're going to run this every month and say, is from today and within the next 30 days, does our expiry fall in that period? And if it does, then we're going to send a notification. If it doesn't, we're just going to let the node stay empty because flow just will stop at that point. So we're going to go through everything in the list and then we're going to find the team's action. And these have changed actually since I made this video. They changed literally the next week, as you would expect. We're going to use this Flowbot to post to the channel because we know we're in that team and we know we're in that general channel. So what we're going to do is we're going to post to that general channel and just let somebody know that something is expiring. So on the 1st of the month, they're probably going to get 6 notifications. So that's probably not the ideal solution. What I'm showing you here is what's possible. You might want to do this expiry every day. You might want to do this expiry on a completely different logic for that frequency. So what I'm going to do is just say something is old. And then we're going to put in a hyperlink to that item. So where it says check it out here, that should receive a hyperlink to that item. Now the sharper HTML audience of you will have just spotted an error that I made, but I've left it in because no demo is quite right without a small error. But let me show you how this runs. So I'm now going to run this flow, and because it's on a list, it will run the test dynamically for you. So we can see that it's looked through 1 of 1 and that it has created as a notification. So let's jump to the team and go and have a look at that notification. And as you can see, I've got a very dodgy URL. So if I nip back to the flow and I edit, you'll see that I managed to put a capital A, which of course doesn't work in HTML. So we have to change that to a lowercase a. And once we do that and we rerun the test, we'll see that we actually get a decent message in that channel. So while the flow worked, it goes junk, which we're not happy with. So here we are. Lovely. So something is old, check it out here. And if we click on that, it will take us directly to the details of that item. Again, you could have taken directly elsewhere, you know, whatever you want to put in that link in terms of the value from the SharePoint list, it is completely up to you. We could have a complete adaptive card here showing the full data of that notification. So just to recap, we now have imported a document. Let's do that again. Let's just pick any document. Now, one thing that you're seeing here is I was trying to show you the expiry going to the SharePoint list. Oh, that's just picking the same document as we had before, so I'm just going to pick another one. Okay, and we're going to hit Save Details. and you'll see that my expiry didn't appear. So again, this is a rookie mistake on my part in that I've updated the Power App, but I haven't hit the publish button. So what I thought I would leave this in because this happens, and it's important that you need to publish and you need the end user to flick between windows so that it loads the most recent version of the Power App to give you that data in. So as you can see, no matter how many times I hit the button, I am not getting that expiry. So I do need to go back to my Power App. I need to make sure that I have the expiry value coming through, and then I need to go and save and publish. Once I've published and I go back to Teams, like I say, a quick refresh between those two top windows, and I will now have a solution that is properly saving that data down. So I left it in because that's a bit of a gotcha that you could easily succumb to. I'm showing you here that if we run and save those details directly from the Power App, that it would have worked. So this version of the Power App works and does in fact save the details back to the signed list. So there we have it with the expiry fully intact. And now if we were to do exactly the same in the app, because we've refreshed it, and we hit save, we should now see Satya Nadella entry with a date. There we are. So it is important to publish, and it's also important to make sure that you get the permissions right on that Power App once you do send it out to a team. So looking back at our solution, we now have all three parts that were requested. So we can create a contract in the first place, we can then scan the signed contracts back in, and now we have a solution for also getting contract expiry. And all the end user has is 4 simple tabs within Teams to add the data, to take the original file, to scan the signed version, and then we have the expiry. And that's really all I wanted to show you today. I think I've done amazingly on time there by scooting through at speed, especially considering we had an issue on sound. But if anybody would like to see fuller versions of this or would like to talk through any parts of that solution, or if there are any questions, please do shoot. This is me, and please do get in touch. Would love to speak to anybody.
That was absolutely awesome. Thank you very much indeed, Sharon. One of the things that always fascinates me about the likes of Power Apps and some other solutions like that out there is this low code thing. And, you know, for years, this kind of concept has come out that, you know, something that's point and click, or it's kind of, you know, semi-code will come out and it will automate stuff and it'll do us all away with jobs and everything else. But in actual fact, it's proven that no, it doesn't. What it does is it frees us up as developers to do more interesting things. And I think that can only be welcomed and embraced. So it was really interesting to see how you were able just to click that through and just make it so seamless and really lower the barrier of entry to maybe someone who isn't a completely deep dive, you know, coder, but nonetheless has a very strong technical knowledge and is just frustrated because they want to get stuff done, and now they can, and that's really awesome.
Absolutely. And again, if you want to make it complex, you know, there's plenty you can do in the background with those connectors to do some really good stuff and still leave the front end really point and click. So I would always say to proper developers, no, to pro developers, that there is plenty there for you, because you don't have to worry now about that UI. You know, that bit's done. So you can do the interesting bit, the logic and the fun stuff in the background that make it jump through the hoops that we want it to jump through.
Yeah, I think it was Charlie Mingus, maybe it was somebody else, but I always remember it being Charlie Mingus, that great jazz player, saying that it's reasonably easy. Maybe it was Einstein. It's one of those folk. It's reasonably easy to make something simple complex, but it's not easy to make something complex simple. And I think what you do is just do that there today, and certainly the whole Power App family to me has really lived up to that expectation and really pushes that out the door, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we are just coming up now to 10 to. We have coming up next on the track is Mark, who's going to do serverless. I know that Mark is probably asleep, so we'll have to probably get the local police to go and throw stones at his window or something to wake him up. He's been burning the candle on all of the ends, I think, to keep things going at the moment. So, Mark, do you want to start a wee bit early?
That's up to you. I mean, I was sort of assuming that, just in case anybody actually turned up for my session, I shouldn't start until the official start time.
Always a good plan.
Yeah.
I mean, a quick question for you, Sharon. Just just a general chinwag on the whole Power Apps thing. You were talking there about you sort of did a Freudian slip there of proper developers. Now,
apologies.
Personally, I'm an old school developer. I like the code, but I have I love nothing more than a Logic app or a Power Automate or whatever you want to call it these days, a Flow, because it saves me all that time. But you do find that, do you find, I do seem to find that there's still a bit of sniffiness from coding developers about this sort of thing that might save them time but isn't proper code. Do you see that from your side?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lovely community actually surrounded by it's basically Andrew Welsh and a whole bunch of people that are addressing this with the Power Platform Adoption Framework. So what we're looking at is how to redefine the fact that we've overused the term developer. So, and I think it is one of those things, it's been going on for years in the SharePoint world, where SharePoint developers have been anybody that could create a list. Do you know what I mean? And it's created a lot of confusion, certainly when you're looking at contractors within that field. So I think it is important to get the terminology right. And I think certainly Luis prefers the term makers, but again, is that already in place for the 3D community? So I think it is a bit difficult to understand what terminology can be put in place to say parts of the process that you just need to get on with that are pre-packaged for you versus stuff that you've got to go and I do development, but I can't start with a blank sheet in Visual Studio and do C#, but I'm still considered a developer. That said, I live with a developer, so I can do pair programming. I can see what's wrong with programming. So I think there is a skill set that's kind of not identified, and we sort of do need that. We need that leveling, but again, people are just people, yeah. So if you have some skills in the C# field, I'm not sure that is the only thing that qualifies you to be a pro developer. It's an odd place at the moment.
Because if you follow it back, you were talking about SharePoint just then, and I've always thought of SharePoint as being access for the web, Microsoft Access for the web, and there's a lot of.
I mean, ouch.
I know a fair few systems that are running in major banks right now, and major hedge funds on a Microsoft Access backend, and you would not believe the money flowing through those systems.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's amazing amounts of stuff built on Access, and beyond that as well. That's only an extension really of Excel, and you would not, the entire business world runs on Excel spreadsheets.
Yep.
I agree.
Yeah.
But I think
going back to the thing. Sorry, go on.
Access claims to be a database, and I think probably actually might do it in some ways better than SharePoint does, because SharePoint doesn't have that ability to work with transactional data and certainly parent-child data in the same way. So I would never advocate that SharePoint is a database. You can use it for list items, but going outside of that, it's never going to be the right solution for a major data structure. So I would always go to the Common Data Service for that, or something SQL in Azure. But what SharePoint is extremely strong at, which is why there are articles out there by me called I Love SharePoint, is, stick to your field. So SharePoint is, and I've recently written an article saying, is SharePoint a document management system? Yes, it is. And it's interesting that is what it is, and that people still don't understand if it is, because it's evolved, because it's now got pretty, and is it an intranet product, or is, but largely SharePoint is for document and information storage and accessibility. So surfacing through search and surfacing through metadata. So it's a knowledge and document management kind of platform that's just a bit too flexible, so everybody uses it.
I was thinking about what you said there about terms for as a developer or engineer, and I know that you've recently got an MVP award, which is awesome, and it really is cool. and then there's there's the Google experts and everything else, and it came into my head of what could we do for these power folk, and I thought, how about Power Rangers?
Oh, well, actually, so I work with Simon Owen over at GSK, and he literally has the Power Rangers. So they do lunch and learns. I made him come and present, but he refused to put the lycra on, which is unfair. So they came to my user group. They do lunch and learns, and he's gone from a few people getting together to talk about Power BI and Power Apps to something like 440 groups across the globe that are all dialing into this one session. And yeah, so I think he kind of stole Power Rangers, actually.
That's awesome.
Okay.
Do you see much of an uptake in business on Power Apps versus other types of equivalent solutions that are out there, maybe from other vendors? How are you seeing that kind of evolve?
Okay, so I think one of the turning points in the development cycle was when we went from a relatively frictionless licensing model to a more friction license model. I don't want to say anything about it. So it's tougher to understand the licensing model around Power Apps now, but effectively it took a step. So Power Apps and Flow, as it was back then, started as a really easy access, couldn't believe it was built in platform, and it then took itself to this premium layer. Now, what people didn't appreciate was that what people were creating in these apps were very quick and very easy, but also relatively low value. So what it did is it pushed itself into a place where you now need to determine the value before you can afford to go and create that technology. And now that's not a bad thing in terms of ecosystem, because my whole ethos is to get to business value. There is nothing that my organization will take on from a customer if we don't see that they're actually going to benefit from it. And that's really the killer here. So there's a lot that you can do in these tools that's, you could take every email that comes in and put it in a document library, but why? What are you doing? What time are you saving? Where's the business value in that? So I think it's important now to determine the business value before you start creating the app. So we've got a lot less, I'm not going to say junk, but a lot less smaller apps and organizations with hundreds of apps. And we now have some really well considered apps and some really good stuff coming through, and it's improving the product.
Just talking there about apps that kind of, go by the wayside, or ones that, take traction inside the business and gain more value. How do you deal with versioning? Okay,
so there is version control within the apps, but the best way to deal with it is a product that Microsoft put out there in conjunction with Manuela Pilcher, who now works there, and also Keith Watling, which is the Centre of Excellence. So we now have a Power Apps or Power Platform Centre of Excellence, which is a bunch of tools that you can have in the background that show you who own apps, what version they're at, and all of those things. So it's summarising all that data in an admin interface in the background, much like some of the Sentinel stuff that we were looking at earlier, that allows you to kind of see across the platform. So it's tools like that that are evolving that are going to make that easier. And also we're getting best practices around how many owners you should have of an app, because obviously if I own an app and I leave the organisation, nobody else can use the app. And again, with Power BI, we're looking at data sources having a value of, approved by the organisation or just a data source. So people will use the approved data sources. So it's evolving into a mechanism so that you know within the organisation which are the right ones to use. And we have a bit more control in the back end of being able to say, doesn't meet the criteria, it's going to get unpublished automatically.
Is there anything out there, funky, a bit like an app store or the Azure marketplace, where someone can say, hey, I developed this thing that's really cool and really useful in Power Apps, so it can be sort of brought into any organization? Is there any kind of sort of
yeah, absolutely. So we have a Power Apps and a Power Automate community sites where you can submit your Power Apps and what they do. So we'll be putting Pac-Man up there this month. So what we did with Pac-Man is we wrote that in Power Apps. We used it at a few events, and now we'll give it back to the community. So what you can do is you can package it in the right way. It goes through some Microsoft, it has to be completely labeled in the right way and what have you. But then once Microsoft are happy with it, exactly like the app source, it goes into that community library. And I think TDG, the Dynamics guys, have got a website that's also got some patterns, etc., on there for people.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay. I have nothing else really to ask you. I think it's a fascinating technology and something certainly I'm going to be delving into myself over the rest of the year. Now that I don't have all of these commute times and stuff, I've got that little bit of extra time I can squeeze in and be told, you know, what about all this time you're saving? You're not spending it at home anymore. You're at your desk. So I'll see what I can squeeze in there, you know. So that's awesome. Mark, going back to your stuff and to serverless, are you ready to rock there?
You might have to make me presenter, but other than that, I'm approximately ready.
Okay, and you won't fall asleep on us?
I'll try my best.
Good stuff.
I'll leave my mic on so you can shout at me if you hear the sound of head-fitting keyboard.
Okay, so
No,
Sharon,
really
I think we'll make you presenter there.
Yeah, that's
I know that serverless certainly, like I delved in it a couple of years ago, and I know you've really kept on top of it, and it's fascinating to see its growth. And I was really interested to see. I'm not sure whether it was a comment you made on the twits or whether it was at the end of your session description, where you basically said that, you know, while we're not quite building everything serverless yet, that's pretty much the future. And do you see it that way?
Well, yeah. So I think things, you know, I think the definition of serverless is expanding. So yeah, I mean, everything is definitely going the way of, you know, you start to just pay for what you use now, and you know, you get stuff provisioned for you as you need it. So I think we're definitely moving away from the idea of, you know, you just buy a large lump of stuff and, you know, you pay a fixed amount for it whether you use it or not. So, you know, SQL now has a serverless tier, Cosmos has a serverless tier, AKS, you know, as we'll soon discover, has, you know, sort of serverless abilities in it. So yeah, I think, you know, it's certainly heading more towards that event-driven, work-driven, pay per use sort of thing. You know,
very interesting.
I mean, as I don't know whether I have it in the bio I put up on the thing, but yeah, I haven't provisioned a virtual machine in anger for about 10 years now. All my stuff is platform, you know, for all my clients, and you know so yeah, but there's lots of people out there still using VMs, so you know they're not going to die. But you know, I think new stuff is definitely heading down that serverless path, and it's certainly being encouraged in that direction by
the powers that be and those that hold the purses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll drop out now and leave you to be in control, and I'm looking forward to a great session. Thanks, Mark.
I'll do my best. Okay. Right. Okay. So yeah, just for those who don't know who I am Mark. I am an Azure MVP, and I have no job title really. Nobody has ever given me one. I'm just a freelance Azure consultant, but I kind of come from a developer background. I've been coding stuff. You know, people have been paying me to code stuff since the 1980s, and I have been occasionally referred to as a cloud solution architect more recently. So I'm a developer with aspirations. Right. So what I'm basically going to talk about today is, we'll start on the noddy stuff. We'll just talk through a bit about why services and microservices and that sort of thing. Then I'll talk a bit about Kubernetes and containers. Then I'll talk a bit about serverless, specifically functions as a service. And then we'll talk about running serverless on Kubernetes. So we start off in the beginning with the monolith. So essentially people would build one big lump of deployable code, and they would throw that over the wall, and it would land on a server, and it would run, and it would probably talk to a database server somewhere. If you were really lucky, there would be 3 tiers to it, and that that was very popular for the longest time, and still there's plenty of people do it, and the small and simple systems, it's still a perfectly good way of doing it. But these days we're looking more and more at this sort of thing. So we're talking about, services stroke microservices. And for my purposes here, I'm going to just think of a service as something that's individually deployable and individually scalable. So in this section, in this case here, we've got some sort of, fancy e-commerce system, and there's a checkout service over here and a cart service over here, and an actual website over here and a product catalog over here. And the basic idea is that if you want to update your shipping detail, shipping information, to add a new shipping service, that has nothing to do with your cart or anything. So you don't necessarily want to deploy your shipping service and have to redeploy your cart at the same time. Also, if your website's particularly busy because it's Black Friday or something, then your catalog service is going to get very heavily used, whereas your payment service is probably not going to be as heavily used. So there's benefit to being able to scale up your catalog service larger than your payment service. So that's where people have started to go. Some people have taken this to extremes, and Uber recently have said that they'd gone to thousands of microservices, and they're now trying to roll it back because the management of that was just too outrageous. But most things these days are split up into a number of services, and the ones that aren't are certainly thinking about going that way. I'm working with 2 clients at the moment who are both doing this. So, what do you do with where do you put your services? The first place people started putting services was in containers. The basic idea behind a container, obviously, is that you can package up your application, your service, into something which is almost like a tiny VM. Now, it's actually a process, or at least a Hyper-V abstracted thing in the case of a Windows container. But essentially, it's your application and all its dependencies packaged up into this neat thing that can be then deployed out, into your development environment, your production environment, your testing environment, anywhere that you want to run it. And in theory, it runs exactly the same because it's packaged up with all its dependencies. It has no reliance on the host that it's running on, so it doesn't matter what version of .NET framework you've got on there or anything like that. The other thing about containers is, they are generally speaking transient. So, they can be long running, but you would tend to assume that a container is either not going to run for long deliberately, or that it may get thrown away at any point. So, you design them to be resilient. And they're particularly good for lift and shift scenarios because all a Docker file is, so if you're assuming you're running a Docker container, all the Docker file is essentially just a list of lines that says, use this operating system base, install this on top of it, pull in these files, and then run this command to start it off. And any application can be built in that way. So anything you've got there, got running there, which can be deployed by itself, can be dumped into a container and run somewhere. Now, the next thing we want to do, we've got our individually deployable service here in a container, but we then want to make it individually scalable, and that's where the big ugly Kubernetes comes in. Kubernetes, originally came out of Google as Project Borg. The idea behind it is that you've got all these little containers here running in what are called pods. And Kubernetes' job is basically to orchestrate them. So essentially, what Kubernetes is a defined state system. So at the end of the day, in the Kubernetes database, which happens to be etcd, you're storing your desired state of what containers you want to run, how many of them you want to run, what sort of requirements they have, how much memory they need, will they need a GPU, all that sort of thing. You set that up through the Kubernetes API. You then have what's called a controller manager, which looks at the current state of your system and the defined state of your system and works out how to change the current state of your system to the defined state of the system if they're different. And then the scheduler, which then feeds out to the actual nodes to tell them what they should be running. Within each of those nodes, you've got the kubelet, which is the sort of overall controller for that node, and usually a node is basically a VM. You've got cAdvisor, which is the thing that keeps an eye on the node and produces your metrics and stuff. And then at this end, you've got a proxy. So when somebody comes in from outside to actually access one of your services, the proxy knows which pod contains the container that can service the request for that service. Now, the other thing you'll notice here, which we'll come back to later, is a pod can have more than one container in it. So generally speaking, you'll have one container which is your container, but you can also have what are called sidecar containers, which are ones that can be injected into pods on request and provide services. So, for instance, you can inject a reverse proxy in there so that when a request comes in, it goes through the reverse proxy to your container, and you can then manage, do management and logging of the network traffic and such like. That's, if you've heard of service meshes, that's basically what a service mesh is doing. So that's Kubernetes. That's about as simple as I can make Kubernetes, and there's an awful lot of stuff if you're doing real things with Kubernetes, which you have to add on to that to make it safe and fun to run in production. But that's the essential Kubernetes story. So you've got a number of VMs running your containers, and Kubernetes is trying to make sure that as your requirement for things changes, that it has the right number of pods running in the right number of places to provide the right amount of service for you. Now, the actual scaling part of Kubernetes is works. There's a couple of different things in it. Within your VMs, within your nodes, you've got a number of pods. And your pods get scaled by what's called the horizontal pod autoscaler. By default, what that does is it goes in, looks at the metrics that are coming out of cAdvisor, which are coming from the pods, looks at those, usually CPU and memory based, and if it decides that there is too much CPU and memory being used based on whatever criteria you've set in there, whatever thresholds you've set, then it will fire off to the deployment that it needs more pods or fewer pods and change the number of pods accordingly. So as your services get busier or quieter, within the context of your overall VM, within the context of your overall cluster, it will spread that load between them. The other thing is when you're running in the cloud environment, so in AKS or in AWS, you'll also have some sort of cluster autoscaler, which works at the node level and allows you to fire up new VMs as you run out of space in the pod, you run out of pod space in the VMs. So if your VM itself is overloaded with CPU or memory, then it will scale out more nodes for you. Just worth mentioning, by the way, since this is an Azure thing, if you're using AKS, then all this bit over here, even though there's actually nodes going on here and VMs going on over here and data, that's all included for you so that all comes for free. So it's only the actual nodes, the VM load that you're paying for. I should say, by the way, if anybody has any questions at any point, feel free to either come off mute and ask, or just drop them in the chat there. I have a separate window open with the chat, so I should see them fairly quickly. And if I don't, I'm sure Ellen will shout at me. So if anybody has questions about Kubernetes before I move on to the next bit, now would be a great time to shout. Otherwise, I will assume that everybody is following completely, and we'll move on to serverless.
Just before you move on there, I think there's probably someone in the channel here who has their mic turned on. We can hear some background noise coming in.
That's better.
Oh, that's much better. Was it you?
No, it wasn't me, but somebody turned it off. So.
Okay, awesome. Let's continue. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, we'll draw a veil over that to protect the guilty. Right. Okay. So now we've got our Kubernetes service there running containers, and we can scale up and down our VMs. But now we move on to sort of the more modern way of hosting services, which is serverless. Now I'll just return to this slide briefly because I just want to talk about something which is quite important about serverless. Now the thing we didn't talk about before was all these lines flying between all the services as they communicate with each other. And the thing is, there's two ways they can be doing that. They can be doing that synchronously or asynchronously. So in the synchronous case, we've got essentially an API-driven thing. So if somebody places an order in this sort of scenario, then we could potentially have customer places an order, the order service takes that and says, okay, we need to create a shipping, we need to get some shipping for this order. So it calls out to the shipping service. The shipping service calls out to the inventory service to make sure that there's enough inventory for it. It goes off and then calls the label printing service, which will print the labels and sort out the packaging. But in a stand, if we'd had all this synchronous, then obviously if the inventory service fell over or if the label printer was sort of somehow foobar, then that could potentially feed up and the order would not get placed because everything would go wrong, or at least you wouldn't know that the order was placeable, so you'd have to come back to the customer and say, sorry, problem, please try again. So and if anybody was in the session that Duncan did on track 3 earlier, we'll all know that ideally where possible you should be making your services talk to each other in an event-driven manner. So rather than when your order comes in, sort of waiting for all the rest of the things, you just fire into a queue somewhere of some sort a thing that says, okay, here's the order, here's all the information about that order. Sort of that order is now done, and then any service that is interested in doing something when an order is placed can then go off to that queue and pull that information. So the shipping service, when it's ready, can go and pull the next order off the queue and go and do stuff, and then it will probably go and fire off another thing to the inventory service as an asynchronous thing that happens. And so everything becomes nicely decoupled. It makes it a lot easier to deploy your services individually, and the whole thing becomes a lot more resilient. So as a side effect of running event-driven stuff, you can actually make systems that are fully event-driven. So I've made a thing that does stuff here, but in theory, you could have a browser out here, calls through to an event-driven service. The event-driven service tells another event-driven service to wait for something to be done. It then fires off to a Cosmos database to save the information. The Cosmos database saves the information, and then its change feed fires off more services down here. So one service could fire off a notification somewhere. Another service could then save off to cold storage. And then once that's been safely saved, it can fire another request back up here that says, okay, go off and say that this request is finished. This can be then using an asynchronous HTTP pattern to say, okay, I now have a reply. And back here, another service could then be firing off another queue message to go off and do all sorts of other stuff. But there you can get a completely asynchronous event-driven thing where your browser comes in, places an order or whatever, and everything starts bouncing around the system. And if you're event sourcing, then your Cosmos database here has saved all that information off so that you can then replay your system from the events and do all the great event sourcing stuff. And these little arrows, that these little lightning bolts here, that the services are of course Azure Functions. And the way Azure Functions work is they are purely event driven. So an Azure function is just a piece of code, an actual code function, but it runs when something happens. So when something comes into a queue, or when an HTTP request comes in, or potentially when an email comes into an exchange or something like that. And anything that happens that can fire a function, and the function will run. It will do its thing. It will kick off whatever it needs to kick off as a result of that, and then it will die again. So importantly, it's always an ephemeral thing. It never runs for more than about 10 minutes, or in certain cases, it can go up to an hour, but it's never going to live for a long time. It's always priced by the amount of time it runs. So if it runs for 5 seconds, you'll get paid, charged for 5 seconds of CPU time. If it can get done in less than a second, you'll get paid, charged for less than a second of CPU time, and you'll get charged a tiny amount for the amount of memory that it's using. But any time that function isn't doing anything, you're not paying for it. There's the reason it's called serverless is because the infrastructure is essentially invisible to you. There are servers under there, but you're not really you don't really care about them. You're just firing your code at the cloud and saying, please run this code when this code needs to run based on whatever events it cares about. You provide the framework, you provide the servers, you provide the network. I just want this code to run, please. So you end up with a very low management thing there going on. It's very low cost and it's very highly flexible. In theory, if you've got nothing going on, then you don't pay anything and you've got no servers running. But as soon as work starts to come in, then the serverless infrastructure behind that will run as many instances of your function concurrently as it needs to process all the work that's coming in. So as long as it can look at your events, so for instance, you've got a queue, it can look at your queue, say, okay, there's a million events in that queue, I'm going to fire up a hell of a lot of functions to process all those as quickly as possible. The downside, of course, is that if you're running serverless, then you're kind of locked to whatever it is your platform provides. So, for instance, AWS only has a certain number of runtimes that it will support. So it will support .NET, it will support Node, but if you've got an old COBOL system, it's not going to support COBOL. If you've got a new Rust system or a Haskell system, it's not going to support Rust or Haskell. Also, the things that trigger your events, your functions, have to be things that have come out of the box in that platform. You can't write your own trigger to say, I've got, if you wanted to trigger off a RabbitMQ or something like that, which isn't one of the cloud platform services, then you probably won't get that, or potentially won't get that as something that you can trigger off. So you are kind of tied down as soon as you head towards this sort of Azure Functions, Lambda, Google Cloud Functions side of things. You are tied to whatever your platform gives you. So that's where we come to Kubernetes versus serverless. And anybody want to butt in with any questions at this point before we move on to the next section?
Boo, I love Kubernetes.
That's an interesting question. Right, okay, so for a while we had this dichotomy. You had the containers people running Kubernetes, so they could run anything, they could run it anywhere. The nice thing about Kubernetes is you can run it on a Raspberry Pi if you want, but you can also run it in the cloud. You can run it on your laptop. You can run it in a data center. It will run just about anywhere that you can run Linux. It's, on the other hand, it's not terribly elastic. So you end up with a kind of fixed cost usually of the number of VMs and nodes that are behind it. Your elasticity was limited to, scaling up extra VMs and scaling back down. So, if you've used the traditional app service type thing in Azure, it's, very much like that, and, you don't get any help. Everything that goes into Kubernetes is in a container, so you're coding it yourself. And as we've seen, sort of Kubernetes, even at the very simplest level, has, a relatively complex infrastructure thing going on behind it. On the other side, you had serverless, where you're locked into your cloud essentially. You have a number of restrictions placed on you, but if you're willing to accept that lock-in and those platform restrictions, then you get very elastic cost, you get very elastic performance, you get your triggers and things provided for you. So you don't have to write any code to talk to an Azure service bus or anything like that. You will just get the message shoved straight into your function as a string or as an object. And there is basically no infrastructure to think about. You just deploy it to Azure Functions and it says, okay, I'll run that for you. So that was where we were, and there was a lot of argument about whether containers or serverless were the better thing, and then somebody started thinking, why not both? I think that person might actually have been Brendan Burns, but don't hold me to that. So the way people had been running, if they wanted to run containers and serverless at the same time, they would have an AKS cluster running, and they would have a separate Azure Functions service or services running. And when the services in AKS needed to talk to the services in Azure Functions, they would have somewhere in the middle either API calls or service bus or something like that to connect the two together. But of course, that means there's a lot of people out there who are looking for cloud agnosticism or just the simplicity of being able to take one thing and do it the same everywhere. Again, I'm working with a client at the moment who are, have been traditionally an AWS shop, but they have a customer who will not let them run on AWS and is requiring that they run on Azure. Now, they have the advantage here that they use Kubernetes for all their infrastructure and all their deployments. So the cloud is just a place for them to run Kubernetes. So they need very little change to actually be able to run exactly the same stuff up in Azure. So what we can do now is to actually take our Azure functions and our serverless functions and potentially our messaging services and just run it all in Kubernetes, all in one go.
Sorry, guys, there's somebody talking there. Can you please mute your microphone?
Okay. So I thought it was a question for a minute, or somebody laughing at the animation.
No, it's awesome. Thank you.
Anyway, so that's the way a lot of people are starting to look at this now. Now I should point out that what I'm going to go into now, which is running serverless on Kubernetes, it's still got compromises. If you can run, if there's no reason for you to not run your serverless stuff in Azure Functions, then run your serverless stuff in Azure Functions, because the consumption plan, the infrastructure that runs behind that is highly tuned to run serverless stuff. So you'll be more flexible, more responsive, more scalable than you will be able to if you run in Kubernetes. On the other hand, if you are in one of those situations where running in Kubernetes, purely in Kubernetes is an advantage to you, then this will get you very close to where you would have been in Azure Functions. So the first thing, AKS specifically here, that we should talk about is what's called AKS virtual nodes. This is based on an open source thing called virtual kubelets. Now, if you remember, the kubelet was the thing that ran inside a Kubernetes node and provisioned all the pods and stuff in it. Now, what a virtual node allows you to do is to say, okay, I don't want my node to be a VM. I want it to be something else. And so there's no sort of similar service in Google, as far as I know, but in Azure, that we can use virtual nodes and virtual kubelets to run up node containers in Azure Container Instances. In an AWS, you could use Fargate, and there's a number of other providers. But what that essentially allows you to do is say, rather than having a VM, I just want you to use Azure Container Instances to provision my containers from my pods. And what Azure Container Instances is, it's a service in Azure that basically is the simplest possible way to get a container running in the cloud. So there's no ceremony to it. There's no fancy reverse proxies around it or anything like that. It's not even as complicated as running up web app for containers in app service and saying, please run this container in an app service. It's just, please run this container, give it an endpoint, close it down when it's done. And it's designed to be very quick to spin up a container, run it and shut it down. And of course, being a cloud service, you can run as many containers in it as you want. Well, when COVID hasn't shut down Azure, you can run as many containers in it as you want. Also, it's charged purely again on the amount of memory and CPU that your container uses for the amount of time that it's running. So you can see that, you know, it's giving you something very similar to the serverless consumption plan type thing of running something, charging you for as long as it's running and then getting rid of it. But we still have the thing of, we need to be able to work out how to scale that out. If we're doing it with the horizontal pod autoscaler, it will watch the CPU and memory, and, you know, once a container is busy, then it will run up more. And at least this way, we don't have to run up more VMs, but, you know, it's still going to be quite slow because it's going to be very reactive to what's going on rather than proactive. So that's where the product called, well, not the product, the open source project called Kida comes in. This is Kubernetes event-driven autoscaling, and it's on there on GitHub, and it was set up by Red Hat and Microsoft, but, you know, it's certainly not only a Red Hat and Microsoft project. And what it's designed to do is to do that sort of thing that you would have got from a trigger in Azure Functions or in some other serverless thing. So it will try to watch the queue, the work queue that's triggering your code, and proactively feed, you know, take that, turn it into a custom metric and feed that custom metric into the horizontal pod autoscaler to tell the horizontal pod autoscaler how many containers and pods you're going to need, not how many it looks like you're needing because you've got so busy already. It also allows you to scale down to 0, where the horizontal pod autoscaler normally only lets you scale down to 1. So, you know, that it works very well with virtual nodes, and it is now a production product. So, you know, it has passed version 1. It is GA. It got released, I think, at KubeCon this year or last year. But, you know, it's now a thing that you can use in production and people are using. And essentially, the way it works is you've got your work coming into a queue or, you know, whatever, somewhere here. Kida will watch that trigger. It will create a custom metric and feed that into the horizontal pod autoscaler. This bit up here is really just, you know, the bit where you feed into the CLI and say, okay, I want Kida to run in my Kubernetes cluster, please. So the horizontal pod autoscaler then scales between 1 and n, depending on, you know, so how many pods it thinks it's going to need to process that amount of work, and you will have defined roughly this, you know, how much work requires an extra pod in your definition. And then if Kida sees there's no work in there, then what it will actually do is to turn that pod off entirely, and then when it sees work comes back in, it will then turn everything back on so it can start scaling up. So if nobody has any questions at this point, I will do a quick demo. Excuse me, I should have got a glass of water. This is going to be the simplest thing that possibly works. So all it's going to be doing is setting up a service bus queue, and that service bus queue will be consumed by an Azure function stroke pod, which does a thing and, you know, processes all the messages in that queue until it's done and then gone. So, you know, this really is a very simple thing. And this is the way it works. So I'll just quickly, I'll just quickly walk you through the deployment script here. So if we ignore the ceremony at the start there, so we're going to create a virtual network. We're going to create a subnet within that our virtual nodes can live in. Create a service principal that allows us to create the virtual nodes. Then we just use the Azure CLI to create a cluster there with all the stuff we need. We enable virtual nodes on that cluster. We connect to it so that we can use queue control. Going to create a couple of service bus queues there, fetch their connection information and save it into the Kubernetes secrets. Helm is the package manager essentially for Kubernetes. So we're going to, update our package manager repos, and then we can use it to install various things that we'll need, like Kida. So here we're just saying, please install Kida on my cluster. And then at the end of that, we have an up and running Kubernetes cluster. Now, obviously, I'm not going to run that live here because that takes 5 to 10 minutes and we ain't got time for that. But once we've done that, then we can do good old YAML, the thing that defines everything in Kubernetes. So this is essentially my desired state of Kubernetes in here for the thing that I want to do with Kida. And what I've got, I have here a Kida worker project, which is actually an Azure Functions project, which is based on a service bus trigger that says when a message comes in on a service bus trigger on this Kida work queue, I want to run, this function here and pass that in as a message. So, if you've not seen an Azure function before, this is literally it. This is an Azure function. It's a code function. That message that comes in there as passed in as a parameter is the message that came off that service bus queue. But Azure Functions has taken care of that. And we're going to do something here and then give up. There was something I was going to say there. It wasn't important. Yeah, that's it. Azure Functions also have the ability, as well as being deployed directly to a consumption plan just as code. There's also, as in the Azure Functions CLI, you can package any function up as a Docker container, which is how we can then get this provisioned into Kubernetes. So if we go back here, I've put that into my Azure Container Registry as a thing called Kida Worker as a container. So here in my Kubernetes deployment, I'm basically telling it that I want to run that container. It has those limits on the CPU and memory. These are the environment variables that define how it's going to run. And this bit down here is telling me that I want it to run on a virtual kubelet. And this toleration means that I'm going to allow it to run on virtual kubelet, even though virtual kubelet by default won't take any pods. And then down at the bottom here, I've got the actual Kida configuration. So again, we're saying this is an Azure Service Bus trigger. So it's going to look at that queue in the service bus on that with that connection string. So that's the thing that it's going to look at to work out how much work's coming in. And those are some configuration values. So we're going to say that, I want to scale between 0 and 5 pods, and I'm going to poll it every 10 seconds because I'm a demo and I want to poll it nice and quickly. So if we come over to the terminal here, there is the current state of my Kubernetes cluster. So basically, it's just got some system type pods in, which we'll see more about later. But what I can do now, this is just, this load work thing is just a little thing I wrote, which will just basically load some messages up into that queue. So I'm going to put 100 messages into the Kida work queue. And you can see as soon as those messages go in, Kida picks that up and starts to create a pod. So, we've now got one pod running there, which, will shortly start processing messages off that queue. And then it looks and sees that, there's still messages there, so it starts creating more. Now, so it takes a short while for the actual container to spin up in those. So, that's why we're not getting immediate processing. But there you can see it's starting to process that down now. So what we'll end up here eventually with is 5 running pods, each processing approximately 1 message a second. So if we give that a short delay, we'll start ticking down there. And if anybody's not following what's going on, this is a perfect time to unmute and ask. So let's slow. So that comes off, and then you can see as soon as that goes back down to 0, it says, okay, there's no work, so I'm going to turn off all those pods, get rid of them again. So we go back down to 0 pods. So that's essentially an Azure function running in Kubernetes, but running properly serverlessly. So it's running in virtual nodes, so virtual nodes, and you can then that can create as many pods as it wants, and you only pay for the amount of time that they're running. Right, so we'll go back to the slides. And we'll go a little bit further now. So the next thing we want to do is, that was still running an Azure function. So we're still kind of tied to the Azure Functions runtime, the Azure Functions bindings and stuff. What we can do now, though, is to get out of the box a bit. This is where Dapper comes along, and I think there might have been a Dapper talk already at some point. But this is another project. Actually comes out of the Service Fabric team originally. So again, it's a fully open source project, and there's a lot of people working on this. And in fact, that slide is out of date. This is since it is now version 0.6 or 7, I think, and still moving fast. But this comes out of the Service Fabric team, because the Service Fabric team had been working on things like sort of what do they call them, the resilient and distributed dictionaries and queues and things, so that for services that are running Service Fabric, they provided software around that to help you provide services to your distributed services. So what they've done is they've extracted that from Service Fabric, so it's not dependent on any runtime, and it can provide, it can run on anything you want. And the way it works is it runs as its own container or even process. And all it requires is that it runs next to your service. So in the case of Kubernetes, it runs as one of those sidecar containers that you saw. And it talks to your container via HTTP or gRPC. So it's nicely tightly bound, and it will provide lots and lots of services then to your service. Now, because it talks over HTTP and gRPC, it can talk to any container that understands HTTP, which is all containers. And it doesn't care whether you're running Rust or Haskell or COBOL or what have you. It will just talk to you over HTTP and provide whatever services are required. And there's lots of things it does. So it provides things like talking between different services. It provides state management. So if you want to have a nice, easy Redis backend, for instance, to all your services, but you don't want to write any Redis code, you use Dapper with a Redis plugin, and so you can then just talk to it and say, okay, persist to this value to my to my shared state, and Dapper will go off and shove that in Redis for you. In particular, what it has is all these resource bindings and triggers. So I was talking about RabbitMQ before. Dapper has a RabbitMQ binding, so it will be able to call into your service through HTTP anytime something comes in on a RabbitMQ queue. And it will work with Service Bus. It'll work with sort of the AWS queues. It will work with GCP queues, and with a whole lot of other stuff as well. So essentially, Dapper provides you with a lot of other stuff. So you get tracing and state management, all that sort of stuff built in. But specifically, it provides you with the bindings and triggers that Azure Functions gives you, but because it's a pluggable system, you can use anybody's third-party provider here, and you can also write your own providers. So if you've got your own event source that you want to use serverlessly, then you can do that through Dapper. So that's really scratching the surface of Dapper. There's a lot of stuff you can use Dapper for in any service-based architecture, whatever it's running on. But for this scenario, it opens up that serverless triggering event-driven stuff for you. The other thing I want to talk about here is the infrastructure, because even when you've got that far, you've still got that thing of Kubernetes being something that really, speaking as a developer personally, I don't like provisioning Kubernetes because I know I'm going to do it wrong and I know it's not going to be secure if I do it. So, it has to go off to some ops people to actually sort that sort of stuff out and, get that done and get the service mesh set up right and all that sort of stuff. And I don't want to have to worry about that really. But, on the other hand, I do want to, to define what services are in there, how they scale, what resources they're going to need, and all that sort of stuff. And that's where the open application model comes in. This is a project that actually has been originally set up by Microsoft, and in this case Alibaba and Ali Cloud. And it's basically designed to split up the responsibility for your application so that the developer can define the application. The application operator can then define that at a more generic level, and the application operator may be the same as the application developer, and then that gets handed off to the infrastructure operator, who may be somebody in your company, but may equally just be somebody who works for your cloud provider or for your infrastructure provider. And basically, you provided them with your application and its configuration and its components, and then they can dump it onto any infrastructure they want in theory. That it could be Kubernetes, but there's it could be equally service fabric or app service, or something else, or whatever they've got running in Alibaba that isn't one of the Azure things, and still be able to deploy that out. And essentially, it still works as YAML, but you're just defining, in a sample one here, you're just defining what for each section of your application, what it is. So essentially, what parameters it takes, what ports it needs open, so what environment variables it's going to need, and what the actual container image is. And then you can also feed in things like, for each workload, is it a server workload? So it's got a, it's got an HTTP endpoint that people are going to be calling into, or is it a worker workload, which is just sitting there, not talking, just doing its thing, but not talking via the network? Or is it some sort of task or singleton type thing? And you can also say, okay, I want this thing to be auto scaled, a manual scale, or you can set up ingress and storage volumes as well. But you can use that to define your application and say, okay, I've got this container which needs to auto scale, I've got this container which needs to be a singleton, I've got this container which I want to manually scale between 1 and 3 instances or whatever. And the idea behind this is that I as a developer can define my application, put my code in a container, and then hand that off to the infrastructure person. Now, this is currently work in progress. They're only up to Alpha 2 at the moment, but this is something we need. I think we need to be keeping an eye on for. And talking specifically about Kubernetes here, then there are a couple of projects. There's one called Rudder, and there's one called Crossplane OAM. And what they do is they take your open application model and allow you to deploy it into Kubernetes, and it comes out as a definition of volumes and services and endpoints and jobs and all the rest of it. Excuse me. So what I'll do here, I will do a quick demo of doing the same sort of thing as we were doing with Kida there, but also taking out the Azure function side of things and using Dapper and OAM. So in this case, here's our YAML this time for this one. Now you can see here, we're still doing the same basic thing. So all this is kind of the same thing, but this time we've got Dapper enabled. So, and I'm telling it that I want to talk on internal port 3000 between the 2 containers in the pod. And down here, I've still got my KEDA thing still working off the same thing, except this time we're working off a queue called Dapper work. And then up here, we've got a Dapper work component, which is telling us that we're going to set up a binding that Dapper understands. So as well as KEDA watching that queue to know how much work there is and how many we're going to need, this is defining essentially our trigger that we would have had in Azure Functions to say that, you know, this is a service bus queue and this is something that we want to call through. And it knows by the name, the metadata and the name there, you know, which container it's going to call through to. The actual code here is just world's simplest node app. It's going to listen on port 3000, and every time it gets a request through to /dapperwork on port 3000, it's going to process it. And again here in our request, that request has been set, you know, to contain the message that came through from the service bus. In this case, it's going to be coming through in cloud events form. So that's sort of the industry standard format for events that happen in the cloud. You know, so that will come through with the body of the message in there. And so it does exactly the same thing, returns an OK, and, you know, there's, you know, tiny little bit more ceremony, but, you know, we've got the same basic thing going on. You know, that's our function. That's the thing that responds to the trigger that we're getting, and we've defined the trigger in YAML. The other thing just to show here in YAML is, you know, here in the open application model definition, I've said I want to run this component as an auto scaler. So basically, when that's deployed, then we should have, you know, we get exactly the same style of thing in theory, except without Azure Functions. So, you know, that was in Node again because it's easy for me, but, you know, I could have written that in Haskell or something else, you know, as I'd required. I could have tied it up to a RabbitMQ that was running in a container in Kubernetes. I could have defined that RabbitMQ, you know, container in OAM just by defining the container, and that was a singleton or as an auto scaled, however that was set up. But, you know, I now have that running, and if I do the same thing here and we cross our fingers, 100 messages in the queue, and if Dapper is awake, it is awake. So we get exactly the same thing going on here, creates a container, and you can see because that's not the Azure Functions runtime, there's no overhead on there. That's just a pure node, you know, so, you know, a pure, very lightweight node application. So it starts processing almost immediately off that queue. With, you know, we've now got up to 5 containers there, but, you know, we'll be done very quickly. And the end of that. 14, 10, 6, 5 a second. And there we go. And as soon as it finished creating the last one, it's terminating them all because it's run out of work to do. I hope that was clear enough what was going on there. So just to wrap up here, still use Azure Functions. If there's nothing blocking you from using Azure Functions, still use it, because you will get, you know, something that is designed to run serverlessly. And, you know, it'll always be a step ahead of Kubernetes, even if it ends up running on Kubernetes itself, which I'm sure it will, because all infrastructure under all clouds and all things is turning into Kubernetes these days. But the good news is that with OAM and things, they're starting to abstract that. So the more that things are running on Kubernetes, the less we should need to care that things are running on Kubernetes. But yeah, if you can't use Azure Functions, then you can you set up, you know, you enable virtual nodes to get essentially the version of the consumption plan that runs in Kubernetes. You use KEDA to get your triggers and bindings for Azure Functions running Kubernetes. For your scaling, you use Dapper to get your triggers and bindings, and you use OAM, hopefully eventually, to be able to deploy that without having to care about Kubernetes. I have no inside information here, so this is purely my own speculation. You know, this is not NDA information or anything, but I would be gobsmacked if there wasn't something that came along at some point for you to be able to define something in OAM and run it in Azure in the same way as you can now run containers in web app for containers and just say, look, here's my web app, here's a little bit of information, run it. Or in the same way as Service Fabric Mesh at the moment, you can do a YAML definition of what your scaling characteristics are of, CPU and memory. I would be very surprised if OAM doesn't eventually become something that you can deploy directly to Ali Cloud and to AKS, well, to Azure, as something which allows you to just say, okay, I want to define a very simple infrastructure and not care about Kubernetes at all. And if anybody is in the business of going and looking these up, Kida, Dapper, OAM all have nice little websites there, which all link off to their GitHub repositories. Azure Functions there, if you want to go and get the public open source Azure Functions runtime that allows you to run Azure Functions in a container, that's on GitHub. And if you just want to read up around AKS in general because you can't get to sleep, then that's on docs.microsoft. And that's everything. So, any questions from anybody?
We don't have anything in the chat, Mark, but I can certainly give you a question myself. And I know a lot of organizations, and certainly we're going through the Kubernetes stuff right now. What would you say is the biggest gotcha, the biggest blocker that you found?
The biggest blocker with Kubernetes, in terms of just running Kubernetes in general, or in terms of running serverless on Kubernetes?
Kind of a bit of both, really. Where have you found that people have got stuck for the longest?
People get stuck for the longest at that point where they say, okay, we've got this running, the developers have got this thing running in containers. Okay, they've got it running in Kubernetes. Now, how do we get that running in production safely? And they suddenly discover that they've got to set, throw in all the service meshes and, get the secret stores set up and get everything safe. And, that's where, you hit the blocker and you have to call in a Kubernetes consultant who can talk you through all this. And that's where I think OAM is going to come into its own, is that if you can just define that at a developer level, that this is my application, and then a cloud provider can hopefully then just provide a simple app service type thing that runs Kubernetes, but it's got an out of the box, okay, here's some endpoints, just expose this, and there's a service mesh in there, but you don't need to care whether that's Istio or what have you. If they can get that abstracted out, I think that will, remove, the biggest blocker, which is, like I said, just literally getting the thing to actually run in production. In terms of running serverless, sort of the biggest difference is just that, you're never going to be quite as responsive as you are in a real serverless scenario. So when people are thinking serverless, they're usually thinking about, sort of the locked-in cloud versions. And I have, there's a lot of people who just refuse to believe that you can do serverless on Kubernetes. So, there's a mind share thing is a block as much as anything on running serverless in Kubernetes, I would say at this point.
I think that's the attraction to it, to be honest. I think, the ability to do that is what a lot of companies are looking for.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, there are a lot of companies that have, bet everything on Kubernetes, and, they, even though there's all sorts of wonderful cloud native services out there, they say, okay, right, we understand containers, we understand how a RabbitMQ works, we'll just deploy it all into containers, put it all in Kubernetes, and then we can deploy that to any cloud we want. And then, the VC funding, there are apparently, I know I know at least one company in Belfast I was talking to, and they said the reason they were running in containers was not because they didn't want to use cloud services, but because their VC had told them that they wouldn't get funding unless they were cloud agnostic and didn't have cloud tie-in. And the only way they could do that was with containers. So.
Wow. Okay, interesting.
What are the AKS design approaches that you recommend to reduce the latency when targeting a global user base? I guess good use of CDN and front door in the case of Azure would probably be your sort of main thing there. Trying to get it to run cross region where possible. There's no magic bullet. It depends on what you're doing with it. But yeah, certainly using a CDN for stuff where possible. Ideally if you can for the web side of things, if you can run something Jamstack so that you've got your front end running in CDN, and then have API calls coming in from that, and then if you can have your API calls distributed to somewhere close into the regions that you care about, and have those load balance using front door or something, that's probably the short answer.
Mark, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. It's a really jam-packed session. Thank you so much for that. Really informative. And I'm sure people will be in touch with you to discuss that further. It's quite the big topic.
Mark XA on everything if you want to find me.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Okay, guys, next up we have Ben Watts. He's going to talk to us about Power Automate, your way to cognitive services and Power BI. Mark is a Power BI and Power Automate specialist. He's also a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. So we look forward to hearing from him. Are you on the line, Ben? Can you take over the screen share?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yes. If you
Excellent.
could share the screen.
Yeah,
As with all speakers, if everybody could stay on mute, and if you have any questions, please do use the conversation, the chat window, and we'll address your questions as we can at the end. Or if you prefer, Ben, for people to come off mute, that's completely up to you.
Whatever people prefer. If they want to jump in verbally or through the chat, it's no problem.
Okay, so I'll hand over to you, Ben. Have a great session.
Great, thanks. Welcome everybody. So I am sharing my screen at the moment, so hopefully you can just see the intro slide. Today's session is going to be very, very interactive, and I really need some audience participation because it relies on processing some images. And I don't want to be the only person supplying images, so I need you to help me out, okay? And I'll get to that in a couple of minutes. So what are we going to do today? It's really straightforward. There's not a lot of slides. I haven't gone into slide presentation mode, so you can see there's only 6 of them, and the first ones are just intro, and the last one's a thank you slide. So there's not a lot of slide stuff to worry about today. It's all seeing stuff in motion. I need you to send some pictures, so you can do this while you're watching from either your phone or from your email client, so that we can get some images processed. So get yourself ready if you can. Get your phone out or get your Outlook or whatever email client ready, and think of a couple of photos that you can attach. You can even take pictures right here and now. It'd be great to see some people actually sitting at their desks and watching and seeing what you're looking like. Maybe not as super dressed up as I am over here, but that doesn't matter. We're all in lockdown and doing our best. So yeah, you can send some photos in, and we're going to see them getting processed in real time and a bunch of cool stuff done with them. So before I waffle on too much more, a really quick part about myself. This is being recorded, so and at the end I'll be sharing links out to the slides. These sessions are recorded as well, will be available later on, but there's a bunch of stuff about myself. So I have my own company here in Dublin. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, Power BI for the most part, and I help coordinate a number of community events like the Dublin Power BI user group, and a new kind of Irish conglomeration of all the groups we've put together as a weekly online thing. So if you don't know about that and would like to dial in Tuesdays at 11 a.m, then give us a shout and we can hook you up with joining that, and a bunch of other stuff. So there's all my contact details if you want to reach out. Okay, first things first. So I need you all to email me a picture that I'm going to process, and here's how it works. And I'll be so kind and even put it into the chat window so you know exactly what to do. I want you to send an email to hello@datalineo.com. Okay, and that again, that can be done from your phone, from any client. The subject has to be this: face me. Okay, case sensitivity doesn't matter. If you do it in all lower, that's okay. Just don't put the space in. I see a few emails come through sometimes when I've done this session with the space in and they get missed out. So make sure you do face me all in one word. So the other thing is to add as many pictures as you want. You can add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever you like. Don't go overboard. Maybe it might take too long to process them. And the only little thing is that they need to be added as inline pictures, not as like a paperclip attachment, if that's okay. So hopefully now a couple of you at least are scurrying away and looking through your gallery and sending some photos through. What I would like to see, selfies are great. We love to see pictures of people. There is some facial recognition type of activities and facial attribute detection done. So that's really cool to see that in action. Pictures of you and friends, it can detect multiple people in images. So it'd be good to see examples of that if you have recent photos. Other stuff as well, it does object detection. So take a photo of your watch or your shoe or something on your desk and send that through to me. Okay, right. Hopefully some of you are starting to do that. And while it's happening, I'm going to look at, I have a live dashboard in Power BI that's telling me who has and has not yet sent images through. So as yet, nothing's come through. That's okay. It does take a little bit of time, and we have one through already. Neil, nice one. Great to see. I'm going to come back to that in a couple of seconds, and we're just going to look at really the process of what's happening. So on the slide, and don't focus on this, keep sending those images through. We'll pop back and we can look at this in a bit more detail again. But we're using a number of different Azure and Office features to make this happen. So to start with, it's Power Automate. Power Automate, there has been some other sessions including this earlier today. It's an amazingly new tool, new-ish. It's been around for a little while. That will, I suppose it's a workflow tool that will do a number of actions for you based on a trigger. So the trigger, the thing that kicks off this Power Automate, is when I receive an email into the hello inbox and the subject is face me, then it will kick off and do all the cool things that I want it to do. So the first thing it does, it will go through and loop through every attachment in that email. So if you have one attachment, obviously it loops through once. It grabs the attachment and stores it into Azure blob storage. While it's doing that, it also writes the detail to my Power BI streaming data set. You'll see I've got two Power BI icons or images on this flow chart here. The first one is a streaming data set. So this means when the data gets pushed into Power BI, it's immediately available on a live dashboard. Oh, great. We have 8 emails received. 3 of them were for me, so we have 5 coming through. Awesome stuff. Joe, Mark, great. Nice to see. Really, really delighted with that. Thanks very much. Hopefully there's a few more coming through, but that's even plenty to make this usable session. So a streaming data set, which as you saw on the previous view there, was actually showing those attachments and the emails and who sent them and the size of the images in real time as they came through. It's also going off, and you'll see it's writing that data to a SQL database in the cloud. So Azure SQL, it writes the contents of who sent it, the number of attachments, and just some header information about what was in the email. And then it splits off and does 2 things at the same time. The first thing, it does facial recognition. So it calls some Azure Cognitive Services APIs. The first one it does is facial attributes. Okay, so facial attributes is it doesn't know who you are, but it just looks at what it sees about a face in the image, or faces in the image. So if there's 3 or 4 of you in the photo that you attached, it will apply this to every face that it will recognize. And it looks for things like your age. Yes, your age. So if you've sent photos of yourself, we're going to have a bit of an interesting view of that. Your gender, whether you're wearing makeup, it's where your eyes are located. It also does more complex stuff like the tilt and the shift of your head and lots of stuff like that. But I'm only pulling out what I really want to show you, and that's the age, the gender, and makeup things, and your facial your facial emotions. So we're going to see a bit of information with that as well. It writes that information to a SQL database, and then it does another thing on facial recognition. So I have my own database in Azure where I've uploaded 5 photos of myself, and it will go and compare all the images that come through and try and determine if any of those faces are me. Okay, it's not a kind of a generic who's famous type of thing. I've created my own personal space. I can add images of people that I know and it will recognize them, but it's also going to see if it recognizes any of the images that are coming through against myself. Now, I warmed this up and I sent a picture earlier today with a photo of me, so you will see how that works. The other thing it's doing in parallel is computer vision. So this is effectively just object detection. What stuff is it looking for, and what stuff other than people related things can it see inside that image? And this is basically objects. So it will list out one to many different objects that it finds in the image. And all of that is also written to a SQL database. Okay, so that's where it's gone through the process. Power Automate is managing all of those things. I'm going to really quickly open up Power Automate, and we're going to have a look at what it's doing. I'm not going to expand every single thing in this actual flow, because the amount of condition statements and things like that makes this flow explode quite heavily. You can see it's succeeded a number of times. So there's a few, there's one still running. Nice to see, but let's have a real super quick look at this and we'll see what Power Automate looks like. So the first thing we're going to see is its nice graphical interface. Not a lot of code needs to be written in Power Automate. I would say as you're starting off in this product, you can write most Power Automates without having to write any code. Sometimes you need to jump into a little bit more complex stuff, and there is a formula language behind it. It's a different language to something that you might have seen before, but again, it just adds to the power of what this can do. So first things first, you'll see it's nicely processed starting from top to bottom. And the first step is when the Face Me email arrives. If we expand and have a look at that, it says when the inbox, looking in the inbox, and my advanced option will see if the subject filter is Face Me. Okay, so when those conditions are met, this Power Automate will kick off. Now I've got a bunch of variables that I needed to use here because there's so many things that I'm stamping and grabbing along the way. That's what all those purple ones are doing. And then at the end, for those of you who did send some images through, you may have already gotten back a nice email from me, and it's beautifully formatted with what it found in terms of image detection. But let's have a look at this apply to each. And what it's going to do, it's going to loop through for every attachment. It's doing a couple of size checks because some of the cognitive services APIs have file limitations in size. I think it's either 4 or 6 meg, depending on which API it is. So I have an actual third-party product that's built into Power Automate, which will reduce the image size. So if you send a 10 megabyte image through, I don't want it to just stop and die because the API doesn't do it. It won't accept that. I will take that, look at the size, and I'll resize it and then continue on to process the image. Now, without going through too much more detail, because this starts to expand into a fairly monstrous view, that's pretty much all I want to do on the walkthrough of the flow itself. But you can see, if we go back, we'll have a look. Hopefully, there's a couple more come through. Yep, so a few of them come through. And if we have a look at our live page here, you can see that we had, you can see myself here, I had sent 3 emails before with 7 different emails, images attached, total size of 3.78 meg. Great, and we've got a list of other attachments, and another one just popped through there. So we're going to have a look and see how they came through at the end. Let's have a look now at our slide. So with that said, all of those things happened inside that Power Automate. This diagram kind of gives you a first level view of the process, but as you saw, there's a lot of if and else's and conditions that make this a little bit complicated. But again, it was done 99% without code. So it was very handy. And it was similar, I think, to what Sharon was talking about and other things that can happen with automation of tasks. So very handy in the business world. I've demoed this particular thing to a couple of customers. They love it, but then they say, yeah, how can we apply this to a business scenario? Okay, so all of the images have been processed. All of the data has now been written to a SQL database. We now want to do our last thing and open up a Power BI report that's going to consume all the data written to SQL. It's also going to be able to view the images that were stored in the Azure blob. and we're going to do some basic analytics on it. But before I do that, any questions or anything like that? Nice and quiet. We're all good? Okay. So let's have a look at our Power BI report. So this is the one that I created earlier, and these are the images that I sent through before this session. So let's have a bit of a wander through. So what we have is a nice list of all the images that were received. And as we click on one on each image, it will show you specific details on, obviously we see the nice image zoomed in, we see the number of faces spotted in the image, and this is only going to be applicable if there was humans in it. Sadly, it doesn't do facial recognition or attribute detection for puppies. That's my dog, by the way. We got him about 4 weeks ago. And he's only a little bit bigger than that now. So he's a cute little fella named Alfie. You can see that there was no faces recognized, obviously not. One object was detected in this image, and then it also gives me back a bunch of tags related to that image. And then the last thing is up here is a basic one-sentence object description. So for those of you who did send in an image, this is what you would have got back in your email. So you would have seen a table with, if you sent 1 or 2 images, you would see a line for every detection or every sentence that was, every image that you attach, you'll see that sentence. We have here a list of the objects detected, and you can see that's kind of a parent-child structure. So you can see the parent is a kind of a high-level poodle. Sometimes it can be something like dog and then poodle, just as it breaks down into a hierarchy. But it's even said miniature poodle, with the parent object being poodle, and then a whole bunch of tags related to that image. So you can see these tags, grass, large, sitting, red, for the color. If you went and processed hundreds and hundreds of images and then were wanting to filter them for example, red, it would allow you to quickly find all of your images that had some sort of element of red in it. That ball is orange, by the way, so don't know how it got that. Sheep, yeah, don't know how it got that. Some of these tags are pretty interesting, but we're going to see in a couple of seconds that some of these tags are very, very accurate. So there's a picture of me. I'll come back to that in a second. There's a picture of my goldfish. You can see close-up of a fish. The image tags, again, there's a goldfish, no faces spotted, 19 tags and 1 object detected. Is there other? There's my cat. Again, no faces spotted or recognized. Cat is mammal, so this one's a little bit less detailed than miniature poodle and poodle. Cat sitting in front of a window and all the tags. This is a watch. Okay, that image isn't popping up there for some reason, but again, you can see the object detected. Just the one, 17 image tags, close-up of a watch, a fairly generic single sentence. I will say that this object description can be interesting. If it's a fairly obvious looking item, this object description can be quite accurate. But if it's a mather of different things, if it's not very clear as to what it is, this particular object description comes back with some pretty interesting results. We'll have a look at this one. So this is where I took 6 things and stuck them onto my desk and took a photo just to see what it would pick up. So you can see I've got a mouse, pen, sunnies, stapler, nail clippers, and some oil. 3 objects were detected, and you can see a computer mouse was one of them. Okay, great. Pen, yep, that's great. Kitchen utensil, quite generic. So it hasn't even picked up the sunnies, stapler, and the can of oil there. So you can see, and I have noticed so far that the particular object detection can be a little bit weak, and I would like to find out. I'll chat with the Microsoft guys to see if there's a reason why it's not very accurate. I've seen lots of other demos that really pick things up well, but in this case, in this particular photo, it hasn't really grabbed the elements of that image. Image tag, again, boat, not sure where it got that from. Skiing, maybe the color of the desktop or something kind of through it to give those tags. But again, a little bit questionable, but all the same, that's what we get back. Now the photo of myself, you can see, so this one, you can see that there's one face spotted and one face recognized. So if there was 3 people in this image, it would see 3 faces spotted as an example, but only one recognized because I'm the only person in my kind of recognition database. Okay. You can see a man wearing a red shirt and smiling at the camera. Yep, pretty accurate. One object detected. Person, yeah, pretty accurate. But I think also the image tags, really important to have a look down here and see that. Very, very accurate. Absolutely. Okay. And the other thing that you might have seen popping up when I was mousing over these images was a little toolbar or a tooltip. So when these images are of people, I give a little bit more detail in the facial expressions that were on the image. So if we just zoom in and have a look at that, you can see we get a couple of options there. So there's a combination of facial expressions that are available, and then a percentage split of where it determines or detects that face to be showing its facial expressions. And you can see there's some interesting ones, happiness and neutral. So this image of me is I'm 70% happy and 30% neutral. So obviously wasn't smiling at my best. But there's other ones like sadness, fear, contempt, surprise, anger, and disgust. So I've really played trying to do all these faces. And the one that I always focus on is contempt. I've always found that an interesting one, that if you see a person coming into the room, and they have a certain face on them, you might say that that person looks surprised, or that person is looking happy, or maybe disgusted or angry. But it was always an interesting one, contempt. And I mean, if I asked all of you to say, what does a contempt face look like? I don't think you could really describe it. But I did finally find out. And in simple terms, if you just move your mouth to the side, that drives contempt. And so if you're ever talking to somebody and they're looking at you and their face kind of moves to one side, I don't think they're really listening to you or enjoying your story. The other one would be facial attributes. So you can see it has detected me. So you can look here and go, yep, it's detected that it's Ben Watt. So for any of you who have sent images through of yourselves or yourself and friends, that it's going to come up as unknown, because it's not going to match any of the images that I have in my kind of recognition database. Male, yes, happy enough with that. Eye makeup and lip makeup is false. Great. Okay, I wasn't wearing any today. And age 46. Okay, I'll be honest, I'm 45. So it's close enough, I suppose. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is refresh, because some of you have sent images in. I'm just going to last check. Yep, that's all we got in. So let's do a refresh. And I know there's a couple of little gotchas that might surface in this demo, that the images don't save properly in the Azure blob and they don't render here in this part. So I know a couple of you, if you've sent images through, they might not render. I'm just going to look in my Azure storage to see if that was the case. No, they should all be okay. So this is now refreshing from a SQL database. It's looking at detected objects, image tags, and all of the stuff that came back from cognitive services. And we're now going to do a wander through and see what you all sent in. The other thing that you might have caught on the slide is this orange part. No photos are shared or saved permanently. I don't socialize any of them, and I delete everything later on. So just be feeling safe that I'm not going to be sending your photos out into the world. Okay, let's have a look. We have some images through. Here's somebody sent some booze through by the looks. Okay, so obviously no faces spotted, 9 objects detected, 32 tags, object description, a bottle of wine on a table, close-ish. Detected, we have beaker and container, bottle, tableware, that's basically what it's detected there. And then image tags, so up the top left here, we have the person who sent that in. So Neil doesn't mind a snifter of a nice whiskey now and again. And I'm just going to have a look at the image tags there, Neil. So it might have seen a reflection of you because it says woman in the image tags. Not sure, but what else do we have? Refrigerator, group, table, bear, some interesting stuff there. Let's have a look at this one. This was sent in by Sharon. Okay, Sharon. So what we have is a very busy looking picture of a conference. And in this case, it hasn't been able to detect anything. So not really sure why. I guess there's not anything particular enough there. It couldn't detect faces because I think they're too small. Interestingly, the cognitive services facial attributes can detect up to, I'm going to say 255 or something like that. It's something that I need to double check. It can detect a lot of faces in an image normally, but you can see this one is just the granularity is a bit too tight, I think, to detect anything. So bit of a failure there on that one. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. Okay, so this was sent in, John. I think I see you there. Man wearing a suit, smiling at the camera. So, John, I can see you're chatting away there as well. So, John, how long ago was this picture taken? Is this recent or what? Just put your comments into the chat window there. But you can see faces spotted is one. Recognized one is actually a bug of mine that I meant to fix. So that actually should be 0 because it's not going to have recognized John's face there. So I do need to fix that one. 2 objects detected. It's detected a person and a tie. Yep, great. And then image tags, front, jacket, clothing, business, yeah, glasses, that kind of stuff. It's not too bad. And then John, 1 year ago, he said, okay, now, John, this is a part that you can take part or not. So we're going to mouse over and see what kind of. Okay, so your facial expression, 99% happiness and 1% neutral. Not too bad. Obviously doing a pretty good job of smiling well. And it did not detect who you were, and that's as expected. Age 38, John, no makeup and no eye makeup. So, John, if you feel like it and you're confident enough, you can put your real age and tell us, or at least tell us if it's close enough to your real age. Let's have a look at what else we've got. Age is correct. Thanks, John. Wow, not too bad. Okay, so in this one, I've unselected this picture. Okay, Joe Scully sent I don't think this is a selfie, Joe. No, it's not. It's actually Donald Trump. Sorry, I got you guys confused there. Donald Trump wearing a suit and tie. Faces spotted is 1. 2 objects detected, person and a tie, same as John's image, I suppose. 28 tags. Let's see if it gives anything cool back for Donald Trump. Bus, woman. I'm sure he wouldn't like to see that. Monitor. So train. Yeah, some interesting stuff coming back there for sure. Let's have a look then. We have. Okay, Mark. Guys, it's all gone political at the moment. Bill Gates. So this is another one that I found very interesting as well. The object description will actually come back and give you the name of the person if they are famous. So you can see that for the Donald Trump one, it did detect him. I have seen in another demo where the person sent in a selfie and it compared them with somebody famous and they weren't happy with it, but they looked vaguely like that person. And it wasn't like a super famous person either. It was some sort of obscure kind of driver or a racing driver or something from Canada. I can't really remember, but it was something interesting. But you can see Bill Gates, Margaret Hamilton, Barack Obama standing next to a man in a suit and tie. I don't know who the man in the suit and tie is because they're all named, but you can see 2 faces spotted. And what we can do is mouse over and get a bit of detail on what it found there. Okay, so you can see in this image, there was 2 faces spotted. And as a way to kind of identify who's who in these two. The 60D and the 7, that's just the last couple of characters of the unique identifier, just so that we know that this row here relates to this row here. So let's have a look. 100% happy, great. We have the second person who is 58% surprise, 37% happy. And what we can deduce is that was Margaret, because in this, in the second row here, her age was detected as 62 and she's female. So that kind of, just by process of elimination, we know that it was her that was surprised at 58%. And then what I don't know is who out of the other two detected as the 40-year-old male. So it could be either Barack Obama or Bill Gates. I'm not really sure. Interesting. Okay, what else did we get? I think that might be the end. Oh, we have one more. Okay, so this one was sent. Okay, so Renji THVR11. Okay, thank you very much for that image. And what do we have? No faces. Obviously, we have a stack of flyers on a table. And we have 4 objects detected: book, cell phone, television, and a bunch of tags with that. Now, I have a feeling there's some other images. Let me see. Should be a couple more. So I'm just going to do another refresh just to see if it didn't miss any out before. So Sharon, is it you on doing Proctor, or who is it? I actually don't know.
That would be me.
Okay. Any questions or anything coming through?
No, just comments about Bill's age.
Yeah.
We don't have anything in particular.
Okay.
Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask, or would you like to come off mute and talk to Ben? I do remember the time you had that famous person, Ben. I think that was when you did the keynote in Dublin.
It was, yeah. I can't remember who it detected that person as. It was a bit obscure, but it was.
It was a sports person or somebody.
It
like
was,
you say.
yeah. And I hadn't heard of the name, so I couldn't remember who it was.
Agreed.
Okay, so you know what? I ran through that super quick, and is the majority of the content. So I'm kind of happy enough to take other questions or deep dive. If anybody wants to deep dive on any parts of this, I'm happy to do so, because I did run through this super quick.
So Ben, I'll have a question. What do you see as a commercial application for this technology?
So for facial recognition and the facial part of it, one of my customers, we did discuss potentially implementing this because they really want to understand their demographic. So the customer is a pharmacy business, and what we have is we have a knowledge of a prescription that comes in. So you imagine that all the prescriptions that are processed in a pharmacy, you have the details of the person who's on that prescription. But what you don't have is actually who brought that prescription in, because we have a huge amount of demographic and age analytics for that pharmacy, from age brackets of 0 to 10, 10 to 20, and so on and so forth. But when they're trying to market and when they're trying to focus on how to correctly approach and discuss stuff with people coming in, for people, like, no child of age 0 to 10 is actually walking into the pharmacy and purchasing their own prescription. And in a very, very large number of cases, folks over the age of, I don't know, maybe it's 80 or 90 plus, they're also not coming in. The people that are coming in are probably in the middle bracket. So it's people coming in for either themselves or for their children or for their own parents. And so we did have discussions, and we did have very good analytics of the patient, but not the purchaser. And so what we found was they really wanted to understand. So say, for example, if there's a particular chronic disease that is common, and we all know the most common kind of chronic diseases out there, if the actual patient is coming in, then they are more likely to want to stop and talk and discuss and find out how to take the medication, because it's something that they might have to take daily, and then they're coming back at least monthly to renew prescriptions. They really want to stop and talk about it, and it's an emotional thing for them. But if that person's child, who's in the ages of 30s or 40s, is coming in, they don't want to say a word. They just want the prescription filled and to walk out. And they really wanted to understand, how many people were coming in for themselves and how many people were coming in on behalf of somebody else. And there was no way to do that. So the only knowledge you have is the name on the prescription. And they did consider, and ultimately did not go ahead with it, is to have a camera and just do a couple of days of analysis and try and detect demographics to see who was really coming into the store. So that was one scenario. The actual object detection, that one kind of came up a little bit as well for them in terms of stock. So they wanted to be able to take photos around the store and to quickly detect objects and look for products that were supposed to be there and weren't there. That would be more about the, say, custom vision, where you're able to provide it with a number of images that it knows what they are, and then take a photo, and it would analyze that photo for all of the images, and then look for images or items that were not in stock. It'd be a really fast way to do stock take. So again, that was a potential way to use the image detection or custom image detection.
Yeah, I think was it Pepsi did a similar thing where they were checking their display stands were, on the right level and all of those things. So the reps were going around the retailers and taking a picture, and it was just comparing whether it fit the contract. It was quite clever. Yeah,
I mean, so most places that you go into, most retail places have a very, very complex planogram process. And the planogram is effectively where everything goes. And that when you go into a store and you're standing at the counter and there's sweets right next to you, they're not like doing that by accident. They're doing that because the person about to purchase is waiting for 3 seconds, is looking at shiny sweets, and just goes and grabs something. Some of the retail places like petrol garages and so forth, when you walk into a garage, there's the kind of the pathway that you have to follow to walk from the front door to the desk, and sometimes they lengthen that path so that you're going around more shelves and potentially grabbing more things, and they call that the golden mile. And again, they really need to be up to date with stuff that's missing, and to know that products are supposed to be positioned. Suppliers would be vying for positioning on those locations. So a supplier could go around to their own retail customers and take photos and ensure that they're what they've paid extra money to have in a more prominent position is actually positioned as planned.
Yeah, I would think from a security perspective, what you were looking at there with the facial recognition, sort of understanding how happy or sad someone is, that again may help. Whether that's looking at whether they're happier when they leave than when they arrive, or whether that's spotting somebody who may misbehave, perhaps.
Yeah, so for sure, there's already software out there. So through a friend I know who owns a small convenience store, there is software out there already that will detect people who've been walking around the store, and maybe they've counted using the AI how many things that they've picked up, and when they get to the till, if there's not that number of things, that it might raise some sort of alarm. So that's already in place, and you've seen like the Amazon store where you just walk in, pick things up, and walk out, and it knows what you've purchased just by using AI. I don't think there's a broad acceptance yet of when you walk into a place that it's detecting you and your age and your facial expression. I would feel that a lot of customers would not be happy with that, even though it's probably happening a lot more than they really think. So that is one of the reasons the pharmacy said, look, we just don't want to cover that just yet, because one person writing a message on social media about that can be quite damning. So yeah, it's not. I don't think it's widely accepted yet.
Joe's making that point in chat. If you can see that.
Let's have a look. Yeah. So it is probably something I don't know the definitive answer on that yet, but it certainly rings a bell that there has been discussions on that, and be it a particular GDPR requirement or even just staying well short of that requirement, people are probably not yet bursting into this facial recognition and age and so forth detection just yet.
That said, I mean, I do think that certain technologies are already using this kind of thing. I think Google is looking at pictures on websites and using that in the search algorithm, etc. Yeah.
I'd say you could bet your bottom dollar that there's stuff happening. And what I wouldn't know if it's a lot more or a lot less than we think, because do you remember the old website that came up, and it was a Microsoft one called howold.net? And you used to put your face on, and it would come back with a bit of a age detection and so forth. And there was talk, and it's this is not a definitive answer on what was really happening, but some people have suggested, rightly or wrongly, that was a way to capture images to use in these now prominent cognitive services algorithms. But to be honest, I think certainly from Microsoft point of view, being massively transparent has been one of the things, and you could see in the news recently that Microsoft have taken a lot of steps not to go ahead with some projects, and I'm just trying to wrap my brain what it was recently, but it was mentioned in the news within the last few weeks about this not quite being ready for broad and unmanaged use just yet. So I think people are still getting their head around it, what the impact it is, before people are starting to use it anywhere that they feel like.
So I guess just to wrap up then, what would you think is the biggest learning curve about putting something like this together?
So, this is plain and simply a kind of a hobby demo. It started off that I'm a BI guy, and the Power BI part of this was the easy part. Putting this visual together was very easy. The calculations and so forth that went into it, not that there was a huge amount of numerical calculations that went into it, but that was all part and parcel of my day job. The thing that I've been spending a lot more time on at the moment is Power Automate. It's so the Power Platform for everybody's knowledge is Power BI and Power Automate, Power Apps, and what's the other one?
Virtual agents.
Virtual agents, yeah. So it's now become a very broad and powerful solution and platform. My career is really focusing on Power BI, but I don't think for long I can live off that without needing and having to have the knowledge of other parts of that technology. The first one that I just moved into was Power Automate, because I'm a data guy more so. So I leaned on that direction of processing things. And so for those out there who haven't used Power Automate, I find out of all of the technologies, it's the easiest thing to get started with. So if you have Microsoft Office in your work, you will have access to it. There's a limited number of things that you can run in terms of number of executions and so forth. But if you go open to your ... when you log into your Office account in work, you'll see Flow or Power Automate is there. And the very first thing that you want to get started with is templates. So a template, there's tons of them. There is absolutely tons of them. And the easiest one to get started with is, I think it's the most popular one, is called Send Myself a Reminder in 10 minutes. And so what that will do is start a clock running, it'll wait for 10 minutes, and ping your phone with a little reminder to say, hey, you asked me to remind you, and here it is. It's not very complicated. It doesn't do anything useful, but it's a nice step into using Power Automate as a kind of first way to get involved with it. Where is it? Send myself a notification. Even this one, send me a push notification with my current location. So that one's even nicer. It'll grab your location. It'll pop up on your phone. it's a nice way to get started because it will create the flow, it'll create all the steps, it'll help you set up the various connections, and from there you can kind of find your way into editing that to suit your own needs. There's no setup. There's not a lot of configuration to get it running. It's a platform as a service, so it's ready to run and really, really easy to step into. So I hugely recommend for those who've never used it before, go into Power Automate templates and pick one of these and get started. Pick the easiest one to get started with because you don't want to drown yourself with too much complexity and things that may go wrong and stuff that you don't have access to. But certainly once you've opened one and seen how it works, you find that it's really not that complicated to do other ones.
Ben, are you finding, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, are you finding the Power Automate inside Power BI a big attraction too, so that you can have an inline form relevant to your data and updating your data?
Yeah, so if you look historically, and historically now is like 2 years, Power BI was a very data-centric tool. It was born from a number of different products that were developed that all came together and got married as Power BI. So it was a data explorer, which is now what we know as Power Query. The data set or the data model, which was a kind of a desktop version of a SQL Server analysis services. The visualization part, which used to be called Power View. I think they were developed by various different groups within Microsoft, but ultimately they all came together, and now Power BI Desktop is the culmination of them. We're seeing that same behavior now, that Power Automate and Power Apps were actually quite independent. They had a very dotted line to each other for sure, but those dotted lines are getting closer and closer. So now again, a solution that you need to build at a customer can just quickly and natively wrap Power BI, Power Apps, and Power Automate flows up as a very, very simple solution without having to think of 3 different things altogether. You can see that already with Power BI, and this has been around for a little while, is that you can publish Power Apps inside Power BI reports and so on and so forth. So those dotted lines that used to be far away are now getting closer and closer.
Excellent. The only last question I was going to ask you is, I believe you run the user group.
Yes.
Locally?
Yeah. So
what are you finding coming up as topics locally?
There is a session on Tuesday. Bob Duffy's doing the session on Tuesday, and that's around troubleshooting SQL and getting SQL diagnostics. I think Bob's on the. Is it Bob on the call?
He has been presenting today, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, Bob's talking on Tuesday. I'll put a link into the chat where folks can find out where that is happening and all the details to. I'm typing this out bit by bit. HTTPS. Right, hang on.
There was also a little bit further discussion on the GDPR aspects of that data. You might want to have a quick look at.
Okay, so I'll come back to that. So I've just put out the link. So what the background is that yes, I run the Dublin Power BI user group, and we meet generally on a monthly basis in person, and we have speakers coming in from around the country and around Europe. And there are other user groups, like there's a Cork and there's a Belfast and there's a Galway, both Power BI and there's Power Apps user groups. So we all kind of rang each other up and said, look, we're all dead in the water at the moment for our user groups. Instead of all creating 6 different online versions of ourselves, let's just kind of create one and run it weekly. So the community cafe was born, and we've had 3 of those so far. And have we had four of those so far? We got one more coming up on this Tuesday, and it was intended as a 5-week pilot. The pilot has proved very successful, so we are extending it now into mid-June. I've got a list of speakers lined up, which I'll be publishing either over the weekend or on Monday And so the link that you have that I've just put out there, you'll be able to keep in tune with that and RSVP through the meetup link. So other questions? Depends entirely what you store. Cognitive services won't retain, but if you store any PII, then it's subject to GDPR. Yep. Also very large distinguish between legal and ethical. Yep, very true. Joe, Community Cafe is excellent. Yeah, also very true.
I think that's a great idea to bring all the communities together. That's really collaborating for all of the collaborators. So that's awesome. Well done.
Yeah, it was a learning curve for us in a number of ways. So the first thing was we learned a lot about Microsoft Teams. So today's conference is using Teams, and we were able to help with a few of the decisions and structure of setting that up just through experience, and also just getting speakers in, setting up a time that suits. We had good discussions on that. Normally our user group sessions in the evenings would be at 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. But now that everybody's working from home, we figured that they're at their desk anyway, and so there's no need to do those in the evening. It'll be probably less likely that people would attend in the evening. So we picked a slot kind of not too early, not too late in the week, not too early, not too late in the day, right at a kind of sweet spot when you could grab a cup of coffee, sit for an hour and listen to one of our speakers teach the topic that they know so well. So yeah, it's been going really well. We take feedback from attendees every week, and the feedback has been massively positive. The other great thing that we found is the location, the geographical advantages were our user groups were in cities, but people are now able to join from anywhere. So we have a map of where people are joining from, and it's the whole country. So we've got all around the country, including Northern Ireland. We have a Belfast user group who are participating as well. And so the map is truly covering everybody who can now join. And we had some feedback on that regard saying, hey, I've never been able to attend these and now I can. So we are already discussing what this looks like after we finish lockdown. Do we let it dissipate and go back to our in-person versions, or should we continue with some sort of online thing? We don't know what that looks like yet, but I don't think it's going to go away completely, because the whole online world, in my opinion, is going to continue in a way that it hadn't continued before after all this, for sure.
I do agree, and I will be horrifically surprised if you didn't have a dashboard looking at the data of where people are coming from.
Yeah.
As Power BI people.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice comment.
Yeah, so that's my Chesterfield chair, Alan, and I get comments on it all the time. I'm delighted with it. It's my thinking chair. I have two of them, and I'll be happy to say I paid nothing for them. We had some very nice neighbours of ours who moved and couldn't cope with them anymore, so I got two lovely Chesterfield chairs for free. I'm delighted with them.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Neil seems more obsessed with his whiskey than the fact that it called Norman.
Wine is not whiskey. I need a glass of, that's true. It would suit me, I think, Alan, glass of port.
Okay, Ben, thank you for that. That was an awesome session. And I think it's really useful to see just how dynamic the data can be as it was sent into you there in the Super Live. That was excellent stuff. And your demo didn't fail, which is always nice to see.
Yeah, so, great. So thanks very much, Sharon. Yeah, just to wrap it up, apologies, it was a lot quicker than I expected. I kind of came out of the gate fairly rapidly because I know we had to shorten the sessions a little bit, so I rocketed as fast as I could. But hopefully we covered enough for you to be interested. I will put in the link the slides. So on my last slide, you can see. So again, thank you very much. I'm going to paste this into the chat. And if you want to look at any of the contents that I covered today, everything is there. So this slide is there. The Power BI file is there. I'll actually pop it open and see you get a mather of stuff to wander through that I'm sharing with this. Where am I? Okay, so it's just a couple of files, but you will get, there's a PowerShell script. So this is the PowerShell script that I run after we're finished, and this goes and deletes everything. So this will go off to my Power BI streaming data set and empty it out. It will go to my SQL table and empty it out. It will go to wherever else that the Azure folder and empty it out. I've no problem sharing this because all my passwords are stored away. So again, you just need to grab yourself a config file. It tells you what modules you need to install before you run it. You'll get the version. So this is the structure of the config file. So again, this is shared with you so that you just need to fill out if you have your own stuff that you just need to update those passwords. This is a Python script. So just to be different, I've got a Python script to list out all of the images that are in my cognitive services database of photos. So when I run this, I get a list of 5 images that I've uploaded. But again, it's just something for you to see how to access the API data through some other way other than, say, PowerShell. Just a bunch of things that will help you see how to go and manage the estate. They're the SQL tables, so I've got the scripts if you want to go and do your own. Again, they're already there for you, and the slide in both PowerPoint and PDF format. And as well, there's other sessions that I've delivered as well, but if you want to jump straight in, it's all in there in the link that I've sent out. And I'll wrap it up there. So thanks very much, everyone. I hope you really enjoyed that, and I hope you're having a great day, and hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was absolutely flawless. Brilliant session. And that brings track 1 to a close. Alan, if you're on the line, did you want to say some closing remarks?
The only closing remark really is to thank every single one of our speakers for coming along and giving their time. I think we all learned a huge amount. To our hosts across all of the track, all of the hamsters who are running the wheels in the background, which is awesome, and of course all of the attendees who came along and took their time to share along with us and learn. So I think now most folk are going to sit back and have a beer. And if you're up in Mark's house, you could certainly get a drink from his very large bucket of beer that he has there. Yeah,
I've got another delivery coming on Tuesday as well.
So that's a wrap, and that's awesome. I think that we're going to aim to have the sessions from our live day today edited down and mostly, because not all, but mostly put up on the YouTube's next week. We'll get to that probably the latter part of next week. And if anybody has any outstanding questions, feel free to get in touch with us either through the Twitter or through the YouTube itself. We'll have the comments open there, and it's very easy for you to find all of our speakers as well online. So that's really it. Thank you again, every single person, for helping out, our speakers, our hosts, the tech folk in the background, Ben, absolutely, for digging us out of a huge big hole last night, and Neil for giving us the services. We couldn't have pulled it off without you. And that's really it. So thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Okay, thank you. I'll be shutting down the channel.
Sharon.
Yep.
So yeah, there should be a new option in the meeting to do end meeting instead of.
Do I stop recording first and then do end meeting?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Sometimes I know the recording doesn't quite go to